Chapter 381. A 7 to 8 centimeter long metal thread that was shaped like a spider's web and emitted electricity on the mental plane transformed into a hollow donut with a diameter of 0.02 mm and a thickness of 0.5 mm in front of Luonan's eyes. Just like that, it weaved and perhaps condensed and shrank, finally forming a microscopic structure on the micron scale, and displaying a wonderful quality between the material and the spiritual plane. Fine. In any case, Luonan had never truly grasped the external neuron's volume, weight, and material. Luonan was quite cautious about the new condensation ring floating in the air. His soul force touched it carefully, but the other side was incomparably cooperative. With just a thought, he could control it effortlessly. It felt no different from the previous version. At first, Luonan was cautious, but later on, everything went smoothly. He was already unable to distinguish the difference between the two versions of the condensation ring. Subconsciously, he controlled the water droplets to fly up and down in the bedroom. The rest of his brain was occupied with thinking, what concept is this? What is the principle behind this? What kind of trick is this? Why the F***ck? His emotions, which had been muddled by the miraculous changes of the external neuron, finally recovered the momentum that he should have after repeatedly thinking about it to no avail. With a surge of emotions, all of his thoughts were overturned. Even though the scene of Luonan seizing his body and exchanging his bones was a wondrous creation, and the mysteries within pointed to the essence of the universe, it was unable to overcome the ecstasy that surged within Luonan's mind at this very moment. No matter how good the theory was, it couldn't beat reality, right? Luonan already understood the practical significance of the changes. From now on, he could carry the external neuron with him to any place that his soul body could reach. Of course, this also included gear. The human mind was just that strange. No matter how strong the desire in the bottom of one's heart was, one could still remain calm when the goal was just out of reach. However, once the goal was confirmed to be within reach, all the previous cultivation would be instantly broken. Before the pleasant surprise brought by the external neuron faded, Luonan's mind was occupied by gear. Luonan confirmed that gear hid a great secret. It was a great treasure trove for him. As the key that was most likely to unlock the treasure, the external neuron also hid a big secret. Perhaps only when the two came into contact would they appear at the same time. He didn't know if his conjecture was correct, but how would he know if he didn't try? Luonan was a bit unable to control his emotions. He was impatient right now. The soul circled around the bedroom 3 times and came up with 3 reasons. First, today is Sunday, the construction team will not work, there are no miscellaneous people waiting there. Secondly, the soul could leave the body and bring along the external neuron. The micrometer scale structure was equivalent to the cross-section of a spider's silk. It was extremely tiny and could come and go quietly without anyone noticing. Thirdly, it was still early. He could make a round trip within 5 minutes. There was plenty of time to explore. If everything went well, he could come back for dinner. If things didn't go well, he could go back again after dinner. All the reasons were in support. All the conditions were in place. What was there to wait for? Before he could finish his thoughts, his soul body charged out of the room, ignoring the window screens and whatnot. When he reached the courtyard, he flashed out of the neighborhood and charged into the sky. Luonan clasped the condensation ring formed from the external neuron, and the flying speed of his soul body was not affected in the slightest. Faint traces of water could be seen in the courtyard, but he disappeared without a trace as soon as he entered the sky. At 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the sun seemed to be at the same level as the dense forest of skyscrapers. Only the endless light still floated in the clouds. At this time, it was approaching the peak traffic period. Small and medium-sized aircrafts were also shuttling back and forth in the high-altitude traffic layer. The late autumn sun was slightly warm, and the high-altitude airflow was dense and cold. The two intersected, and the impact of Luo Nan's emotions melted a bit. He suddenly came to a realization. The external neuron had a physical body. Only the heavens knew what the consequences would be if it were to collide with something while flying at high speed. There was nothing wrong with rushing to excavate the treasure, but he was carrying the external neuron. If he were to lose it in a careless operation, he might as well smash his head into his bed and play soccer. Luo Nan was about to fly out of the Nade district by now. His thoughts stirred, and the flying speed of his soul body slowed down a bit. He was a bit further away from the uppermost traffic layer. As for the condensation ring formed from the external neuron, it floated in front of his soul body all this time. The condensed bead of water had lost too much energy from flying at high speed. It was practically shapeless. Even though it was endlessly replenished, it was still several times smaller than when it was at its peak. An odd thought crossed Luo Nan's mind when he saw this situation. In the next moment, he used his soul strength to guide the external neuron into the interior of his soul body. As long as he didn't get into a car accident, the external neuron would be fine. The feeling of his soul body swallowing the external neuron was very subtle. This was because there was a constant transmission of soul strength between them. After the external neuron was absorbed into his body, this transmission relationship was completely assimilated into the interior of his soul body. The process was roughly like this. The soul body would first pour soul strength into the condensation ring that the external neuron had reconstructed. The power of nothingness would naturally possess the nature of interference power. It would gather the water molecules in the void. Under the high-speed flying state, the bead of water would be lost at every moment, but it would be endlessly replenished. The early stages of the accumulation of water molecules existed on the nanometer scale. Luo Nan could do nothing about it, but he could sense the large-scale condensation of water vapor in the later stages. This feeling was like the soul body inhaling and exhaling water vapor, carrying out a peculiar breathing. It naturally formed a connection with the outside world. In the traditional sense, the soul body was only at the level of a Ein soul. Of course, it was impossible to realize such a connection. In fact, the source of this phenomenon came from the new version of the condensation ring. The interference power emitted by the condensation ring gathered water, and it acted back on the soul body itself. It permeated into every corner of the soul body. And then, Luo Nan's high-speed flight came to an abrupt stop. He hovered high in the sky, and below him was the stream of light from the aircraft whistling past. It was as if the entire city was operating at high speed. Only he stood alone in the sky, distancing himself from the world below him. He didn't have the leisure to sigh with emotion. He just happened to find an interesting processing machine for his soul's strength. This machine swallowed nothing and came out something. It absorbed 0 and came out 1. It burned nothingness and condensed reality. This was the condensation ring. This was the external neuron. As the interference power gradually pervaded, it was as if a set of incorporeal skeletal meridians had been stuffed into the soul body. It was draped with flesh and tendons of the same nature. Well, this description was a bit too exaggerated. A more realistic way of saying this was that Luo Nan's soul body seemed to be plated with a layer of gradually closing incorporeal yet marvelous membrane under the full effect of the interference power. Figuratively speaking, Luo Nan's soul body seemed to have turned into a cloak. Luo Nan's core consciousness resided in the center, and he made contact with the mental and material worlds at the same time through this cloak. The cloak became the facet of the mental and material worlds, intersecting with both planes. It was thin to the point of nothingness, but it had marvelous effects. Luo Nan's consciousness was wrapped in this cloak, and it had a bit of an independent flavor. It seemed that there was an indescribable layer of separation between the mental and material planes. The feeling was subtle. The current Luo Nan was no longer on any plane. Instead, He existed in the interlayer between the mental and material planes. Wherever his mind went, he would sink in that direction. Of course, he was in a soul-body state right now, so he naturally leaned towards the mental plane. The resistance he faced on this side was minimal, close to zero. Forcefully interfering with the material plane would certainly consume a lot more energy, and there would be a few more links. But no matter how much energy was consumed, it was still a breakthrough in his essence. Luo Nan's consciousness suddenly flashed, and the incorporeal cloak stirred. It heavily smacked the nearby void under the surge of soul strength like a storm. Wind appeared out of nowhere under the sunlight, and it transformed into a fine stream. It spun and traveled several dozen meters away, nearly brushing past the upper edge of the high-altitude traffic layer before finally dissipating. The stream of air went far away, and Luo Nan's state of mind was like a whirlpool, endlessly turbulent. However, his state of mind had swelled to the extreme by the time the stream of air dissipated. See? Such a crude attack pattern was able to cause considerable turbulence in the material world. What did this mean? It meant that Luo Nan had leaped out of the stage of soul embodiment, the level of a Yin god. He could truly interfere with the material world, shifting the interference force from the tiny structure of the condensation ring to the entire world. Such progress was like jumping from the ground to the clouds. But under the catalysis of the external neuron, it was logical and natural. This was because this was a jump from nothing to something. It was a qualitative change from 0 to 1. 1 begets 2, 2 begets 3, and 3 begets all things. It evolved into limitless possibilities. It was impossible to overstate the great significance of the external neuron from this perspective. And to put it bluntly, all of this was brought about by the external neuron. How did it accomplish this? In the end, what kind of product was it? What else could it do? It could serve as the framework for Luo Nan's God gear. It could serve as the materialization of the structure of nothingness. It could serve as the pivot for the transformation of soul strength. And all of this seemed to have only unearthed a small side of the external neuron. It could do much more. For example, gear. The more doubts Luo Nan had in his mind, the more expectations he had for gear. He knew that this sort of mentality wasn't healthy, but he was unable to endure it no matter what. His soul body suddenly entered a state of flight once more, and its speed increased. Right now, his connection with the outside world grew more and more real. His perception of the late autumn setting sun and the high-altitude cold wind grew clearer and clearer. It was to the point where he forgot himself. He roused his power and howled to his heart's content. He didn't deliberately attack the material world, nor did he have the substantial power to stir the void. But the incorporeal attack on the mental plane still rapidly spread in all directions. It was fortunate that Luo Nan hid himself deep enough on the mental plane. He didn't go to a depth where most ability users could probe and create a major event. Even if he did create a major event, Luo Nan couldn't care less. He cut into the Pingjiang district of Acumen College in the blink of an eye. Gear was already in sight within the range of his mental senses with a radius of over 20 kilometers. At this very moment, there was nothing else that could attract Luo Nan's attention other than gear. But there was a difference in the magnitude of the attractive force within the various regions of gear. Luo Nan's mental senses covered the area, and he locked onto the westernmost region of the building on the ground of gear. It was a large atrium 50 meters deep and 20 meters in diameter. With a sudden jump, Luo Nan's soul body cut into gear. He arrived within the atrium and floated in the center. His feelings of urgency and anticipation suddenly transformed upon reaching his destination. Luo Nan began to become nervous. He was just as anxious as he was before. He was just as anxious as he was now. His emotions transformed to the fullest, not missing a single bit. The fluctuations of his mood didn't affect his perception at all. Within the atrium, the entire structure of gear guided and gave birth to a chilling aura. It was just like what he experienced on that night. Wave after wave of energy gathered here. After the orderly flow of energy shifted, this place lost all dominance and became chaotic. The ticking sounds rang out on the mental plane. They seemed to have a clear rhythm, but they didn't have any direction. It was like someone had purposely messed up a password lock, waiting for a successor who knew the secret to come and crack it. Of course, the successor would need to bring a special key. Luonan's soul body floated in the air. He suppressed his turbulent emotions and sensed earnestly for a moment. He confirmed that the current situation was no different from that night. He followed the solution from last time and gave himself a boost. He stirred the chaotic aura within the atrium once more. Last time, Luonan's boost revealed a classical visualization structure. It was the geometrical figure of a tetrahedron, inscribed sphere and circumscribed sphere. But as the format pyramid transformed into a star atlas, the external symbol this time changed into a rotating nebula. Its appearance was greatly different, but the effect was the same. It gave this space a thrust of order. It began the process of cyclotron acceleration like a particle accelerator. Once this process began, there was no option to slow down or stop it. Luonan's soul body floated alone in the atrium. He calmly welcomed the crazy scene of layers of restriction, rotation, and acceleration. He also experienced the myriad curtains that fell on the mental plane. The layers of strange information intersected. He knew long ago that the mental plane in his eyes was different from the vast majority of ability users. The mainstream theory of the structure of the mental plane divided the mental plane into 3 zones, 1 region, and 1 domain. It was simple and clear. But from Luonan's perspective, the mental plane was a deep multi-layered structure. There were hundreds of layers, thousands of layers, and there was no end. The vast majority of phenomena on the mental plane of the inner world could be calmly explained using general theory. In comparison, Luonan's perspective was far too cumbersome and complex. However, Luonan had never seen an explanation that was more accurate and appropriate than his multi-layered curtains perspective in describing President Ouyang's logic world. Yes, the logic world. Luonan never stopped pondering over the strange phenomena within the atrium over the past 2 days. He already felt that the atrium cyclotron he sensed right now was actually a bit similar to the logic world. At the very least, it was a method of distorting the mental plane. Of course, there were more differences. Chapter 382. From Luonan's perspective, President Ouyang's logic world used the complex structure of the mental plane to forcefully pull the distant plane over, forcefully linking it with the surrounding material world. It was like casting a hook to fish. It looked casual, but the purpose and logic were extremely strong. It was just that outsiders had no way of knowing. The atrium cyclotron took the form of the order bestowed by Luonan as the core. It stirred forcefully, causing the nearby region to weave and twist, pushing outwards layer by layer. It was like grabbing one end of the bedsheet and twisting it forcefully. This would cause the other end to spin, pushing it closer and further. On the other hand, the logic world already had a blueprint and was constructed layer by layer. As for the atrium cyclotron, it started from the inside out. First, it changed itself. Then, it probed into the distance. One was building a house. The other was the telescope. It could be seen that the effects of soul strength were different. The structures and algorithms were different. The results were as different as heaven and earth. Luonan had always suspected that the huge increase in the range of his mental senses after that night was due to the effects of the telescope's structure. Right now, the information gathered by the telescope was gradually enriched. The gray-white light smeared and interweaved on the mental plane, gradually materializing to reveal the marvelous landscape of the clouds high in the sky. But no matter how close the telescope's perspective was, the real situation was still separated by a layer. Last time, Luonan had fallen here. It was impossible to truly touch the cloud world that he yearned for day and night with just the telescope's structural model. It was something that Luo Nan could only do if he didn't rely on external objects. But today, he had the external neuron. The external neuron didn't have any particularly obvious reactions during the early stages of the Fargazer realm's formation. It was just that the bizarre cloak that had just taken shape had already revealed a special quality due to the external neuron's influence on the road. The cloak warped and rippled within the rapidly rotating atrium vortex, but it maintained an inconceivable degree of flexibility and independence. It continued to display its ability to interfere with the mental and material planes. Because of this, the myriad curtains that fell on the mental plane were connected to the surrounding material environment through the cloak. It was just a little bit, but it was like the cloak when it took shape. It achieved a breakthrough from zero. This allowed Luo Nan to realize a small portion of the effect similar to the logic world. It formed a warped independent region around his soul body. The problem was that the most powerful aspect of the logic world lay in its logic. That was the decisive factor in its construction. Luo Nan did not possess that sort of logic. After the interference between the mental and material planes was achieved, the corresponding area no longer belonged to the scope of the faraway realm structure. There was no specific order and it was purely a superfluous thing. It would also increase the burden of the soul body. In just a few short seconds, the cloak had become a little sluggish. The excessive structure directly affected the efficiency of the soul energy conversion. As the situation continued to worsen, the external neuron, which was the center of the conversion, was finally stimulated. The condensation ring constructed by the external neuron showed signs of instability for the first time. Some of the lines were extracted from the condensation ring and reached the center of the structure of the condensation ring, where they performed new structures on the microscopic level. This was a completely spontaneous action of the external neuron. Luo Nan's consciousness did not participate. In fact, the scale of the fabric this time had already been probed down to the micron level. It exceeded the precision of his senses. Were it not for the fact that the external neuron and his consciousness were tightly linked together, Luo Nan would not even have the slightest of senses. Though this was the case, Luo Nan's state of mind was pounding and throbbing. He gradually became high-spirited. He was unable to clearly probe the composition of the external neuron, but the chilling aura and the myriad of changes in the curtains were clear to see. During the rotation-acceleration process, the chaotic, distorted interference between the mental world and the material world began to show regular fragment. The corresponding interference forces no longer conflicted and melted each other. Instead, they piled up and spun, achieving a certain reflection with the structure of the telescope. If the rotation speed of the telescope was said to be 10, then the region that Luo Nan could interfere with and warp had a rotation speed of 1. Every 10 revolutions of the telescope, the interference area would revolve once. It was precise and rhythmic, but it was gradually changing and speeding up. 10, 1, 10, 2, 10, 3. The rotation speed of the telescope was already relatively fixed, but the rotation speed of the interference region was constantly increasing. When it came to the material plane, there were already obvious signs. In the center of the atrium, the light in the void was clearly distorted, and the low sound of bing-bing, like the vibration of a bowstring, continued without end. If Luo Nan hadn't lost his temper 2 days ago and destroyed the majority of the surveillance cameras inside gear, this piece of information would have been impossible to hide. How could Luo Nan care about this? His soul body was located in the core region of the distorted void. He could personally experience the extent and speed of the distortion. The cloak was no longer sluggish, but the layers of acceleration accumulated astonishing potential energy. It pushed his emotions endlessly, causing his body and mind to tremble both inside and out. His guess was correct. No matter what form the external neuron took, its existence held an extremely important meaning to Gear. It was like a key was inserted into a keyhole. It twisted according to the rules of induction, and the heavy door slowly opened for him. 10, 4, 10, 5. In other words, when the telescope structure made 2 revolutions with his sole strength, the interference region revolved once as well. The 2 revolutions were perfectly synchronized, and Luo Nan's consciousness went blank for an instant. This was because at this very moment, the stacks of gray clouds he had been paying attention to all this time collapsed without any warning. It was as if the entire sky was pressing down heavily on him. Luo Nan came to a realization in the next second. It wasn't that the firmament was pressing down. It was that he was piercing through the clouds. Heaven and earth had already shifted. Luo Nan crashed into the depths of the nearly boundless grayish-white cloud layer. His perception of the outside world was a bit more realistic thanks to the existence of the cloak. Clouds piled upon each other under the dim lighting. Smoke flew about, and a blood-like color seeped through the gaps between the clouds. A direct chill and the ear-piercing howl of the wind came at the same time. This place seemed to be some high-altitude region, probably the upper part of the troposphere. The airflow was intensely disturbed, like a never-ending tsunami of clouds and mist. The airflow swirled the clouds, water droplets, and ice crystals. It swept past with a rumble, violent and manic. The astral wind blew through the gaps between the clouds. Luo Nan could see that there was an even vaster space beneath the thick clouds. It was just that it seemed to be covered by a prairie fire. The blood-red color between the gaps between the clouds was the reflected light. That's right. It's here. It's here. Luo Nan looked all around. He saw the cloud world that often appeared in his dreams, and he personally experienced this absurd yet realistic scene. Even though he didn't know where he was and it was hard to distinguish between things, his impatient and unavoidably absent-minded emotions from the past 10 days finally knocked the last nail in his coffin, and it fell to the ground with a bang. He let out another howl under his impassioned excitement. This time, the cloak stirred the clouds and ice crystals, and a wave of grayish-white air rumbled out. But soon it was swept flat by the fierce whistling high-altitude astral wind. It was annihilated within the surging and flowing clouds, leaving no trace behind. The vile environment of this place could be seen at a glance. However, no matter how vile the environment was, Luo Nan, who had entered in his soul body form, received the same effects as nothing. It wasn't like last time, when he had entered with his fleshly body in a muddle-headed and relaxed manner. Since he didn't have the ability to fly, he fell madly all the way. It was hard not to be flustered under the darkness of the sky. He held on for a dozen or so seconds, worried that he would fall to the ground and die without a corpse, so he could only move out. He never expected that it would be so difficult to enter again. In any case, it was hard for Luo Nan's imagination to run wild when faced with such a vast world and experienced such a marvelous and strange place. In the final phase of Gear's atrium, the telescope became a silo under the magical effect of the external neuron. Luo Nan was directly transported to this cloud layer of unknown origin and unknown position. Only the heavens knew how far this place was from Xia City and Gear. A few 100 kilometers? He had never heard of a similar environment around Xia City. Tens of thousands? All right, this was very fantastical. It was very pretentious with extraordinary power. It was useless to let one's imagination run wild. Though it was difficult for Luo Nan to enter this place this time, he was 1,000 times more relaxed than last time. He decided to observe carefully and gather as much information as possible to provide a basis for his later judgment. Observation and reconnaissance had always been Luo Nan's strong suit. Pure observation combined with the living starry sky gave him an effective observation range of over 20 kilometers. Aside from extraordinaries who were unable to grasp accurately, this was a top-notch observation range in the modern world. And as the saying goes, knowing oneself speaks for itself. After Luo Nan comprehended the principle of the structure of the telescope, the utilization of his soul strength had a clearer goal. He consciously adjusted and optimized it, and there was still considerable potential to be excavated. If this continues, it won't take too long to break through with an observation range of 25 kilometers. But who the hell can tell me which part of the world has a cloud layer that exceeds 50 kilometers in thickness, and it doesn't even have a boundary? Luo Nan was at the peak of a young man's memory. His general knowledge of geography was quite decent. He remembered that the relevant course had taught him that it was impossible for the cloud layer to exceed the height of the troposphere, and the Earth's troposphere was the highest at the equator. It was only 17 or 18 kilometers. The polar regions were only 8 or 9 kilometers. What the hell was 50 kilometers? Yes. He was too timid last time. He couldn't hold on for more than a dozen seconds before fleeing. According to the results of his observations, how could he live up to the cloud layer thickness if he didn't freefall for 5 minutes? His soul body floated within the cloud layer, staring blankly for a while. During this time, the two sides of the cloak interfered, condensing mist for him to form a blurry human silhouette. It was very likely that it would become more lifelike if this continued for a period of time. Luo Nan didn't care about this. He had already begun to feel that something was wrong. Not to mention the thickness of the cloud layer, the blood-red color within the cracked and warped cloud crevices did not fade for a long time. He had previously taken it for granted that this was the influence of a great fire burning on the surface of the earth below, or perhaps a volcanic eruption. He was even prepared to use this to further clarify the specific coordinate. But right now, the range of his mental senses, which he was so proud of, couldn't even go beyond the cloud layer, let alone confirm a volcano. Moreover, was it really a volcano? Luo Nan was deeply doubtful. His observation continued. The living stars were spread out, displaying a simple ecological map within the range of the mist. A few believers continued to display their usefulness in the surroundings of the core star cluster of the self format, but the life forms further away had already switched to another group. It would be quite awkward to say another group. The cloud region was inconceivably vast, but the density of life forms was truly urgent. Luo Nan could only detect 2 or 3 kittens within the range of his senses of over 20 kilometers. Alright, what did he say just now? Kittens? Luo Nan's thoughts had yet to come to a realization when a thick cloud suddenly exploded a dozen meters in front of him. Smoke scattered in all directions. A dark red shadow flashed into existence out of thin air. It was as swift as lightning, smashing through the cloud layer and pouncing in front of Luo Nan in the blink of an eye. A thick and long arm smashed over, and its sharp claws distorted Luo Nan's perception. Only now did the boiling murderous aura appear with a rumble. Not only on the material plane but on the mental plane as well. It brought forth a terrifying attack akin to an eruption of lava. The change happened right in front of him. There was no room for him to operate his thoughts. Luo Nan could only make the most instinctive reaction. The cloak interfered with the mental plane to the greatest degree. He ignored everything else and his soul body escaped to the deepest depths he could reach on the mental plane. The blurry silhouette formed from the mist exploded and shattered, turning back into water smoke. The attack on the material plane had hit nothing but air. But the most fatal attack was still on the mental plane. He had been thinking of a volcano just now, but now there really was a volcano erupting on the mental plane. It was as if Luo Nan had returned to the time when he first saw the terrifying might of the human-faced arachnid. He looked at the enormous specter that was burning and expanding in the void. The specter faced the sky and roared, extending its claws to strike over. It was truly like an erupting volcano, a pillar of turbid smoke and fire that smashed into the clouds. The mental plane trembled and swayed. The burning demonic claw, brimming with the desire to destroy, chased after the tail of Luo Nan's soul body. It crushed through several hundred layers of the curtain structure of the mental world to form a shadow behind Luo Nan. Luo Nan could already feel the breath of the Grim Reaper. However, the Grim Reaper's scythe was unable to hook onto its target in the end. Luo Nan didn't know just how deep he had dived into the mental plane. He only knew that the burning demonic claw had crushed through nearly 1,000 layers of curtains in succession before finally reaching its limit. No matter how much it ignited with its killing intent, burning through and warping the majority of the mental plane, it was ultimately unable to crash into the level of Luo Nan's soul body. It was just a little bit off, but it was still not enough. And in reality, the powerful attack missed. The dark red shadow completely disregarded the laws of matter. Its figure came to a halt like a steel nail, smashing into the clouds. It seized the position of Luo Nan's cloud aura silhouette and used malevolent eyes to stare fiercely at Luo Nan. What the hell was that? Luo Nan was both shocked and furious. His reaction to stress just now was truly extraordinary. It was all thanks to his soul body. If his fleshly body had come in, wouldn't he have been smashed into a meat patty just now? No, from the speed and strength of the attack just now, he would probably have been blasted into smithereens. He would have died without an intact corpse. It was fortunate that he hadn't encountered such a situation the last time he came in. Otherwise, today's matter wouldn't have happened. Right now, Luo Nan was like entering a wildlife sanctuary. He was sitting in a fully armed tour bus, separated by a layer of transparent glass. He was in close contact with a dangerous, ferocious beast. As for the ferocious beast, it was entrenched in the clouds, revealing its malevolent body. Its height should be between 5 to 7 meters. The reason why there was such a large discrepancy was because its body was crooked like an ape. Its forelimbs hung down, making it hard to judge. Chapter 383. The skin of the beast was dark red, and its bulging muscles were covered with a layer of fine scales. Its bald skull was wrapped in a thick layer of wrinkled skin. The top of its skull was deeply caved in, and its eyes bulged out. Its pupils were dark red, and its background was dark yellow. Its mouth and nose were almost indistinguishable, forming a circle of dark purple that looked like a paste. Saliva flowed from its mouth, making it ugly and ferocious. Just by looking at its appearance, there was no doubt that it was some kind of mutant species. It looked a little like a gibbon, but it was 100 times uglier. Luo Nan didn't know whether or not this fellow belonged to the type of mutant that had already been discovered. In any case, he had no impression of it at all, so he gave it the name of mushed-mouth ape at the last minute. At this moment, the rotten-mouth ape was staring straight at him with its crimson eyes. It was clear that the enemy was able to lock onto Luo Nan's specific location on the mental plane even though the enemy was unable to attack him. Just this point alone surpassed the vast majority of people Luo Nan had encountered. After about a minute, the mushed-mouth ape seemed to have grown tired of the pointless staring. Its strong body slowly sank and disappeared into the clouds. Its gaze never left Luo Nan's location until the very end. Its gaze was turbid, but it possessed the cruelty and greed of a predator. This made Luo Nan understand that this mushed-mouth ape was treating him as prey. It had no intention of giving up in the short term. As long as it grasped the opportunity to break through the isolation on the mental plane, it would slaughter its way over without the slightest hesitation. It would tear Luo Nan to pieces, then it would devour and digest him. Some time later, Luo Nan's thoughts were verified. Sure enough, the mushed-mouth ape didn't leave. It maintained a high level of patience and intense desire. It constantly wandered around Luo Nan's surroundings, ready to make a move. Sometimes it really did launch an attack. Its tyrannical and overbearing attack pattern was able to exert pressure on Luo Nan even if its attacks failed. From this point alone, the mushed-mouth ape truly lived up to its name as a top predator. It was trying to turn a failed ambush into a marathon of death that tested its endurance and determination. Controlling his soul in the depths of the mental plane at all times to avoid the attack range of the mushed-mouth ape was indeed quite tiring. He had to use the cloak to interfere at all times, and the consumption of his soul power was considerable. But it needed to be emphasized once more, Luo Nan wasn't afraid of consumption. He wasn't afraid of consumption. He wasn't afraid of consumption. Important things must be repeated 3 times. It wasn't easy to move around in the depths of the mental plane. The current rate of soul power consumption had indeed surpassed the output of the production line, but only by a little. It was like the evaporation of seawater by the sun. Although the amount was considerable, compared to the total amount of seawater, the consumption was negligible in a short period of time. If Luo Nan wanted to, he could race this mushed-mouth ape for several days and nights. They would see who would tire out first. However, Luo Nan didn't have any thoughts of torturing himself. He was even more unwilling to waste his precious time on a meaningless chase. After taking the opportunity to observe for half an hour, he sped up with all his might. With the astonishing flying speed of his soul body, he forcefully shook off the mushed-mouth ape's pursuit and regained his peace. Even though Luo Nan had gotten rid of the threat, he saw that the cloud region that Gear and the external neuron had guided him to had such a vicious being. This greatly exceeded Luo Nan's expectations. Luo Nan wasn't purely observing the mutant during the previous half-hour of pursuit. He followed the scouting method he had just learned not too long ago. He circled around a temporarily set center, crossed and flew, and did his best to expand the range of his senses. He was unable to obtain an exact number at the moment, but he made a rough estimate. His soul body continued to expand outwards at high speed. The cross-sectional area it covered probably exceeded 10,000 square kilometers. It was a vast airspace with a diameter of 100 kilometers. It was equal to the size of the core city area of Xia City. But not only did he not discover the limits of the cloud layer, even the top, bottom, and 4 directions became blurry in the end. Only one thing was clear. The mushed-mouth ape he encountered had appeared again and again in this airspace. He no longer had any thoughts of 2 or 3 kittens. Even though there were only a few of these valiant and tyrannical kittens in the 100-kilometer area, it was still too crowded for apex predators. They moved like lightning, and their range of activity was frighteningly large. Luo Nan tried to lock onto 2 of them. He only followed them for a few minutes before the targets jumped out of the limits of his senses. But at the same time, new mushed-mouth apes leaped in. Last time, Luo Nan had only stayed here for a dozen or so seconds due to falling from a high altitude. He had avoided a direct confrontation with them. It was simply first-rate luck. Sigh. He seemed to have overlooked something. He needed to sort it out. First of all, his encounter in the atrium of Gear and the marvelous use of the external neuron proved that his mother, and that person, had come here back then. Second of all, regardless of his mother's fate, they had indeed escaped unscathed back then. Luo Nan made a rough estimate of the mushed-mouth ape's strength. Judging from its attack power alone, it should be above B rank, not yet A rank. And it seemed to live in groups. It could be said to be quite terrifying. There were a limited number of similar locations on Earth, and all of them were places where even extraordinaries had to take a detour. Did his parents already possess this level of strength back then? It was truly impossible to judge from the bits and pieces of information related to his mother in his memories. Luo Nan could not deny this possibility, but there were other explanations. For example, the cloud world back then wasn't this dangerous. This thought popped up in Luo Nan's mind because he noticed that only the mushed-mouth ape and the others flew through the cloud layer. They were extremely monotonous. According to his limited knowledge of ecology, this didn't make much sense. Even if they were mutants, they were still a type of living creature. They needed to survive at the very least, and eating was the most basic. The mushed-mouth ape did indeed possess a powerful desire to hunt, but the cloud layer environment was too monotonous. So far, Luonan had only discovered this type of living creature. There were no others. There were no other minerals or plants with high energy densities that could be ingested. The basic conditions for feeding them were not present. In addition, even though they maintained a distance from each other and maintained vigilance, Luonan couldn't see any intense desire to kill each other. Devouring each other and the like was not a normal option. Of course, Luonan considered the mushed-mouth ape to be a mutant, to be a living creature. If this thing was a fantasy breed that ate the wind and drank dew, a legendary demonic god, then Luonan would ignore what Luonan said. Was this the case? The possibility was very, very low. Luonan was temporarily unable to draw a life sketch for the mushed-mouth ape due to the interference of the powerful life magnetic field. However, the berserk and scorching life energy could not be faked, let alone the corporeal desire to hunt. All in all, Luonan concluded that these mushed-mouth apes were very likely affected by special factors. They had temporarily entered this area. For example, hunting prey. The mushed-mouth ape that had just killed Luonan not only possessed brilliant and skilled hunting techniques, but its choice of attack was also very appropriate. It hunted with caution and patience, as if it had practiced this frequently. Luonan drew a simple inference from this. They should have a target, at least in the near future. They were adept at roaming the mental plane. They very likely possessed the ability to interfere with the material world. They possessed a certain counterattack method. They had even caused a vicious mutant of B-rank strength to suffer a loss. They were mainly active in the cloud layer, but it was very likely that they had gone to other places and provoked a pile of trouble. All right, there must be a target. Luonan's chaotic thoughts finally became clear. But after becoming clear, his first thought was to slap himself in the face. If his guess was correct, he had personally thrown the target in. It was that snake tongue. That's right. He had hurriedly entered and exited the cloud layer through gear that day. Luonan still had Snake Tongue, who had suffered a backlash from the curse, in his hands. He didn't know how he had thrown Snake Tongue away, but he thought about it carefully. Indeed, it was most likely that he had thrown her here. If this was the case, Snake Tongue wouldn't have suffered a backlash from the Nightmare Vine spell while she was in a fugue state. She shouldn't have fallen to her death and been here for 10 days, right? Luonan was a layman when it came to the curse branch. But after that day, he did some understanding of Snake Tongue. He knew that this woman was one of the few curse experts of the inner world. Her mental state was extremely formidable. No matter how fierce the backlash from the curse was, it wouldn't be able to trap her for long. If he were to consider this line of thought, then the current situation would have a relatively clear explanation. Of course, this was pure conjecture. Perhaps his mind was obstructed, and his train of thought was wrong, leading him in the opposite direction. But in any case, Luonan's current mood was showing signs of worsening. The joy and sense of accomplishment from overcoming countless difficulties and finally entering the cloud world had long since been scattered by the volcanic eruption of the mushed-mouth ape. But before he could sort things out, he thought about the matter with Snake Tongue. He thought about the great secret his mother had hidden for many years. He didn't even have a clue about the bizarre and wonderful cloud world, and he had been tossed about by a wandering soul for 10 days. What if some extremely valuable clue was destroyed by Snake Tongue? Or perhaps she deliberately hid it and spread it? What should he do? The more he thought, the more anxious he became. Luonan made a firm resolution to find Snake Tongue. If she was alive, he wanted to see her. If she was dead, he wanted to see her. Even if he was dead, he wanted to see convincing evidence. Luonan pondered for a moment and chose to follow a mushed-mouth ape. He would observe it for a long time before making a decision. But the stalking didn't go smoothly. Luonan's chosen target wasn't the one that had attacked him before. It was just a random choice. This fellow's body was a bit smaller, but it was just as valiant. Luonan was deep in the mental plane, exceeding the attack range of the mushed-mouth ape, But the ape still sensed him. The long stalking caused the target to react greatly. It turned around to chase and attack many times, but it was never able to touch Luo Nan's true body. It became extremely manic, constantly going in circles, refusing to cooperate. Luo Nan was annoyed, but he couldn't help but sigh in admiration at the same time. Such keen senses and the ability to suppress the material and mental planes at the same time were simply perfect methods in the domain that the mushed-mouth ape could reach. From the information obtained by the society, extraordinaries were excluded from the various ability users due to the different nature of their abilities. For example, the format of Fire of the Burner could attack a Darksider species like the human-faced arachnid, but its destructive power was a bit weaker than in the material world. It wasn't like the mushed-mouth ape. Its destructive power was astonishing no matter what plane it was on, and there was no obvious loss in conversion. As for how it was used, how much experience could Luo Nan earn from observing it a few times? Even if Luo Nan wanted to copy it, it would be hard for him to do so. He could only drool at the mushed-mouth ape's methods. Time passed like this, second by second. Luo Nan knew that it would be hard to find any clues related to Snake Tongue if this continued. He was just about to change his train of thought when a strange feeling spread over from the other side of the void. Chapter 384. Luo Nan was certain that the connection between his soul body and fleshly body was still there even though he had moved through the void. It was just that the distortion was severe, weaker than it had ever been. He couldn't estimate the distance at all, and his perception of the details was also a problem. Luo Nan was a bit flustered when he sensed what was happening over there. He didn't care about anything else, but he was worried that his aunts would come home and see him lying on the bed like a corpse. They would send him directly to the hospital. Even though Luo Nan had 10,000 hopes of doing an in-depth exploration of the cloud world and ascertaining Snake Tongue's whereabouts early on, reality was right there. He still had to kneel. With a thought, in the empty center of the condensation ring structure, the new structure formed by the external neuron released a corresponding signal. The soul cloak's interference method changed, and in an instant the world changed. In the depths of the clouds, the messy-tail ape, who had been teased for a long time, was still in a rage. The threat that had troubled it for a long time had suddenly disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared. The mush-tail ape had a stupefied expression, and it circled around on the spot a few more times before leaving resentfully. Luo Nan had already returned to the normal world. It was a familiar place. Just like last time, it was still in the tree hole of the withered tree sandbar, a kilometer away from Gear's main building. Sure enough, there was a clear pattern for entering and exiting the cloud world. It was set up intentionally. Luo Nan was both shocked and impressed by his mother's design back in the day. Unfortunately, he was unfilial as a son. He had casually thrown out a piece of trash and caused trouble. At this moment, the connection between the soul and the physical body was much clearer. Luo Nan also knew that it was a false alarm. It wasn't that his aunt and uncle had returned. Instead, it was his wristband vibrating to alert him that someone was contacting him. However, if uncle and aunt called, it would also be a headache. The wristband was not like the Hexaear. It did not have the ability to listen to calls from a distance of 80 kilometers. Luo Nan knew that he had to go back. He reluctantly circled around the tree hole, flew into the air, and sensed Gear from afar. Only then did he flee into the air. On the way back, Luo Nan once again set a new record for the speed of his soul body, traveling 80 kilometers in just 4 minutes. This was equivalent to a speed of 1,200 kilometers per hour. It was already infinitely close to the speed of sound. Actually, it wasn't impossible to reach the speed of sound. It was just that Luo Nan didn't know what sort of state the external neuron would be in when it broke through the sound barrier. It was better to be cautious and experiment when he had free time in the future. Luo Nan anxiously looked at his wristband when he got home. He conveniently returned his soul to his body. When his body and soul became one, he finally realized what was going on. External neuron. Just as he thought about it, he realized that the external neuron had returned to the depths of his brain and transformed into its original form of a long electric line. It circled around and formed the carrier of the divine wheel structure, supporting the iceberg-like soul energy. Quite the initiative. If the structure of the condensation ring came in, Luo Nan shook his head in a hurry. He gave up on this standard idea that water had gotten into his brain. He got up and stretched his neck to look at the caller ID on his wristband. He definitely wouldn't be able to pick up the first call. Later on, the person called twice more before stopping. But luckily, it wasn't the uncle and aunt that Luo Nan was most worried about. It was an unexpected acquaintance. Luo Nan blinked. It was actually Mo Han, Sister Pomegranate, who was ranked 16th in the younger generation of his uncle's family. Filled with doubts, he dialed the number back. The call was quickly picked up. The person on the other side said hello twice, and the surroundings seemed to be very noisy. Sure. Sister Han, I was taking a shower just now, so I took off my bracelet. Is something the matter? Luo Nan forcefully pushed the dangerous words back into his mouth. He blurted out a lie and assumed an obedient posture. Mo Han switched the ambient mode, and her voice soon became clear. She was in a good mood. She didn't care whether Luo Nan's reason was true or false. She laughed and said, I just confirmed it with Peng 17. I'll be there at 7 o'clock sharp tomorrow night. Little Nanster, prepare to receive me. Tomorrow? Isn't it tomorrow? F***ck. He forgot that there was still a torment. Luo Nan opened his mouth, but the words of refusal didn't leave his mouth in the end. Mo Han was a lively and straightforward girl. There were only a few people of the same age in the Mo family who truly treated Luo Nan as a younger brother. After the incident at Frost River Reality, Mo Han even made a special trip to the hospital to visit him. Speaking of which, didn't this sister feel any lingering fear last time at Frost River Reality? That's right. Their group of people had been brought back to the police station early on. The impression they left behind was just a group fight. As for the situation in the news report, it was mostly separated by a layer. In this way, Luo Nan was the one with a shadow in his heart? Luo Nan ended the call with Mo Han with absurd emotions. He turned his hand and called Mo Peng. The moment the call connected, Luo Nan bluntly asked, What the hell is with this constantly expanding team? Mo Peng was yelling, Do you think I'm happy? It's clearly a get-together. Isn't Shirlu helping her family by going there? So hurry up and find someone. Find a fierce and handsome guy to bewitch her. Don't ruin our brother's plan. Plan your sister. I don't have a sister. Go find my sister. Luo Nan thought of Emoya, who was about to embark on her return trip. He immediately shivered and said unhappily, Just how many people are you bringing? Which idiot leaked the information? I admit it. Luo Nan was so stupid that he cried. He simply hung up. Luo Nan looked at the time again. His aunt and uncle could come back at any time. It was no longer suitable for his out-of-body state. He could only wait until nightfall to discuss it. His soul body withdrew, but Luo Nan's mind was still spinning in circles above the clouds. He diligently pondered on how to detect the shape of the sky over there as soon as possible. He wanted to find Snake Tongue's whereabouts, but he didn't have a clue for a time. After thinking for a long time, he changed his angle. He remembered that there was still a very crucial question. Where in the world was the region above the clouds? Boundless, thick clouds that defied common sense. Burning bloody light flowed between the gaps in the clouds. The powerful mushed-mouthed ape flew here and there. Each element was extremely distinctive, but when gathered together, it was like a casually drawn demonic face. It was hard to distinguish. The reason for this was that the elements that formed the demonic face were somewhat contrary to the logic of reality. Luo Nan was even thinking that this wasn't some place on Earth, but a fantasy land. Luonan put aside his fantasy thoughts for now. He needed to consider the problem from a practical and measurable perspective. He didn't consider the thick clouds for now. He didn't care about the source of the bloody light. He just started with the mushed-mouth ape that he had observed for the longest time. The mushed-mouth ape should be a type of mutant without a doubt. It had gregarious tendencies and powerful strength. According to the knowledge he had learned, high-level mutants had quite a strong sense of territory. Only a small portion of the mutants resided in large groups, and the area was relatively fixed. If Luonan was able to investigate its species, there was a high chance that he could determine where on Earth this world was. Luonan gave it a try. He transformed the image of this monster into a mental signal and searched on the psychic wave network, but he didn't find anything. Clearly, relevant information didn't exist in the public information. He once again had the idea of obtaining classified information. This was a bit more troublesome. Right now, the Xia City branch's secrecy system was being implemented step by step. Anyone who wished to access classified information and utilize related resources needed to apply for access privileges. The threshold wasn't high aside from a very small portion of special information. However, access records would be left behind for future tracing. It was said that the secret level of the database was sealed off in passing after the branch exchanged large amounts of information with the military. Hiyuane's work was certainly involved in this. No matter what other people said, she was modifying the behavior of the ability users of Xia City bit by bit. Luonan first subconsciously applied for an intelligent search service, but he suddenly reacted and chose to cancel it. This was a bit of selfishness. He didn't want to expose too much information regarding the cloud world. He hadn't even figured out his mother's inheritance, yet he wanted everyone to know about it. What was the point of this? The more he wanted to protect his food, the more Snake Tongue's existence was a thorn in Luonan's heart. He needed to find that female ghost as soon as possible no matter what. Luonan nearly wanted to kill his way to gear, but he was still rational. He knew that he couldn't cause any new problems before dinner, so he forcefully suppressed the urge. He needed to adjust his state of mind. He thought for a bit and took advantage of the time. He was applying for access privileges to the database to borrow the Mutant Species Encyclopedia, Inner World Edition, and some other video and text materials related to mutants. He also pulled up the video materials from last year's intermediate training class, supplementing the handouts and notes Papercut had sent him. He needed to act like an obedient child at home before dinner. Using the precise and nimble dripping sword to pass the time was just right. Luonan didn't deny that he had a very special feeling toward the dripping sword. Not to mention the dripping sword's own effects, the structure of the condensation ring had truly made a great contribution. It drew in the external neuron to form a central structure that transformed interference power, thus forming a soul cloak. It could freely choose the direction of interference on the mental or material plane, freeing Luonan from his weak and frail body. Needless to say, Luonan would owe this favor when he entered the cloud world. Once a person developed a sense of intimacy toward a certain skill, they would possess an abundant driving force. At first, Luonan just wanted to pass the time, but when he truly began to research, his standards unconsciously rose higher. Not only did he need to improve upon the core structure of the condensation ring, but he also needed to carefully ponder over several auxiliary structures. Speaking of which, he was quite curious. The condensation ring had undergone a body rebirth with the external neuron. Could auxiliary structures be added to it? If so, what state would it be and what effects would it have? With a single thought, Luonan simply went into an out-of-body state. With just a slight thought, the condensation ring structure appeared from the nothingness of his consciousness. It was engraved in the void, and the external neuron seemed to possess intelligence. It sprang out at the same time, following the relevant structure to take shape. Since the process was extremely short, Luo Nan couldn't tell whether or not his consciousness had directly controlled the external neuron to form the condensation ring. Also, he could faintly feel a tiny point in the hollow structure of the condensation ring. This was the key structure that opened the door to the cloud world in the atrium of Gear, affected by the cyclotron acceleration. Whoa! It even has a memory function. Luo Nan was truly convinced. The structure at the center of the condensation ring was already below the nanometer scale. It was impossible for Luo Nan to study it with his current abilities. His mind rippled a few times, and he returned to practicing with the dripping sword. He first experimented. He assembled the three auxiliary structures, the guidance, the amplification, and the acceleration, in a probing manner. In the structural design of the dripping sword, the amplification structure was a stabilizer. It ensured the continuity and stability of the long-distance effects of soul strength. The acceleration structure was like the nitrogen-oxygen acceleration system of a modified car. It was responsible for explosive acceleration in a short period of time. On the other hand, the guidance structure was used in micro-operations to increase the sensitivity of operations. These three structures complemented each other with the basic condensation ring. Every time a structure was superimposed, its controllability and explosive power would increase. As for the sharpening and rupturing structures, they belonged to the attack modules. They were mainly used on the condensed water bead. Luo Nan had yet to try them out. Luo Nan was actually quite worried that the condensation ring, after undergoing a body rebirth, would reject the other auxiliary structures. Therefore, he placed them very carefully. The early stages were pretty good. The new version of the condensation ring accepted several auxiliary structures very generously. Though there were differences between the real and the virtual, the control was quite smooth. Luo Nan was just about to be happy when he saw the condensation ring split into lightning. The lightning leaped into the three auxiliary structures. The auxiliary structures didn't even circulate for half a circle before they collapsed one after another. It was hard to support them. Luo Nan didn't feel defeated when facing this scene. He just felt that it was a bit familiar. Wasn't this the situation when the external neuron and the condensation ring were connected? Luo Nan thought about the tiny structure at the center of the condensation ring. Could it be that the new version of the condensation ring had the spare power to perform a body rebirth on the other auxiliary structures? Luo Nan carefully sensed the entire process of the auxiliary structures collapsing. He knew that he couldn't let the external neuron take the blame. In fact, he had learned the auxiliary structures quickly. They weren't polished like the condensation ring. The structures were too rough, and they weren't stable enough. The lightning was uniform, and there was air leaking in all directions. There was no value in using them as a reference for reconstruction. In other words, he needed to meticulously sculpt the auxiliary structures and dress them up beautifully in order to gain the favor of the external neuron. What the hell? Ridicule was ridicule, but Luo Nan was still looking forward to it. This precise and exquisite painting style was very much in line with his aesthetic standards. And if he could really do it, wouldn't it be a dripping sword structure completely forged from the external neuron? Metal. Actually, Luo Nan didn't know if the external neuron's peculiar material could be considered metal. But the flexible and tough combination of material molding was perhaps the sword pill of novels? When the time came for him to use it against an enemy, the enemy would think it was a bead of water, but it was actually a solid particle. Its penetrative power and lethality would increase by 10-fold or 100-fold. That would be fun. He needed to think about it a bit more. The external neuron was such a precious thing. If he were to toss it out like a hidden weapon and it was taken away by some powerhouse, he would be better off dead. Luo Nan began a new practice amidst this tangled mood. The 5 auxiliary structures were far inferior to the condensation ring in terms of complexity. But he still needed a lot of painstaking practice in order to reach the level of refinement and precision. Luonan was smarter or luckier than the others. He was the first to create a blue or purple level condensation ring. He had a reference template and a standard. Luonan attracted the external neuron to undergo a rebirth. It was tantamount to having an indestructible carrier and testing instrument. Any of the auxiliary structures that lacked precision would not be able to pass the threshold of Luonan's subconscious. Even if he managed to fool it, the external neuron would feel that the quality of the harem wasn't good. Electricity would burst forth, and any defective product would immediately disintegrate. This was another torturous process. Luonan had just wanted to kill time before dinner, but he never expected that he would spend the next 4 or 5 hours on these auxiliary structures. He had no choice. When a person's brain became excited and their concentration increased, it was not easy to reverse their direction. Chapter 385. Luonan's mind wasn't too good the next day. He sat in the classroom, his mind dispirited most of the time. His mind was blank during class. Not a single bit of what the teacher said entered his ears. Shuelei only met up with him before the 3rd class. He was shocked to see Luonan's condition. "You broke your training?" "I stayed up late." Luonan's answer was concise and clear. He had been practicing the dripping sword until midnight yesterday. After the night class, he couldn't help but go into an out-of-body state. He crossed half the city and entered the cloud world from gear. He continued his search, constantly familiarizing himself with the environment. His search yielded no results, but he didn't sleep the entire night. His mind was dispirited from going back and forth. Shuelei was a clever person. His first reaction was, "Did you miss your morning and evening classes?" "Nope." Luonan rolled his eyes and yawned. Shuelei spoke very seriously. "It's about the same even if you didn't miss it. Blood and energy are nourished and consumed during training. It's very complicated. Your way of playing is like lighting a lamp and boiling oil. The effects are halved." "Then what should I do? How about I sleep for a bit during class and you help me keep an eye on things?" "That's fine too." Luonan reached out to poke him. "Bad friend." Luonan buried his head in the crook of his arm before Shuelei could retort. He fell asleep in the span of 2 or 3 breaths. To be honest, although he hadn't left the house for the past 2 days, he had experienced too many changes, absorbed too much information, and learned too many things. His brain had reached its limit, and he really couldn't take it anymore. In any case, this was a public class. The enormous lecture hall was the best cover. A few possibilities flashed through Luonan's mind before he fell asleep. For example, Shuelei calling him, Peony calling him to begin the search mission, the society calling him, and so on. But things were hard to predict. What truly woke him up from his dreams wasn't any of these factors. It was a stimulation that came from the mental plane. It came from a position that seemed very close, but he couldn't grasp it. The Wraith sign? Luonan's thoughts captured the most crucial factor. But before he could truly sort out the clues, a scorching and explosive feeling suddenly exploded. It followed the incorporeal connection on the mental plane and came rumbling, shaking the god wheel. The situation was simply like a meteorite falling from the heavens. It smashed into a vast ocean of glaciers. The god wheel shook for a moment, and the surging and abundant soul strength created waves. It instantly formed a dozen or so tides that came crashing down. Out. Luonan was really caught off guard. The god wheel frame constructed from the external neuron was stable, but the feeling of pain and danger was real. He screamed. His body tensed up, and his entire body. His knee hit the bottom of the table, and the tables and chairs in the lecture hall were fixed. A muffled sound rang out, and Luonan's entire body bent like a prawn. He hugged his knees and sat down. Shuelei was shocked to the side. The first thing he did after coming to his senses was to throw his entire body over to protect Luonan. He believed that Luonan had suffered an assassination attempt from headquarters or some other power. He wanted to prevent Luonan from suffering a second injury. The classroom was silent for a moment, and then the lecturer on the podium said coldly, "What are you doing?" In the next 3 seconds, the classroom went from buzzing to roaring laughter, and the discipline in the classroom instantly collapsed. As one of the best educational institutions in Sia City, Acumen College had never been a place where one could spend their days leisurely. Although they didn't go as far as to implement some sort of militarized classroom discipline, there were naturally conduct points and strict examinations to punish students who caused trouble in class. Luo Nan had shaken the entire lecture theater to the point of buzzing. Xue Lei had directly pounced on Luo Nan with the weight of Mt Tai. If Luo Nan didn't raise his blade and make an example out of Xue Lei, he would be letting down the class time system. The lecturer on the lectern was a middle-aged woman in her 40s or 50s. Her facial features were quite good-natured, but her expression had turned cold and hard after receiving such a torment from Luo Nan and Xue Lei. "Get up, I'm fine." Luo Nan struggled to break free from Xue Lei's oppression. He endured the pain in his knees with great difficulty, and when he straightened up, he saw this scene. He was already exhausted to begin with, and his reaction was much worse than usual. He was even more sluggish, and he could only display a stupefied expression, unable to do anything. Xue Lei was about the same to the side. He still hadn't switched out from his bodyguard identity. Right at this moment, the young female teaching assistant, who was a support staff member, walked over to the lecturer's side. She said something in a soft voice. The middle-aged female lecturer's anger was suppressed, and she spoke coldly. "Students, please stand up." Luo Nan and Xue Lei glanced at each other, and they obediently stood up. "What are your names?" Luo Nan and Xue Lei had already accepted their fate. They lowered their heads and said their names, but they were a bit vague. The female lecturer didn't care. She just said, "Students, if any one of you isn't feeling well, you can go to the infirmary and get treated as soon as possible. Don't disturb the other students in class." Yes, he's having hysteria. I'll immediately take him." Xue Lei reacted, and he directly made Luo Nan into a mental patient. He made a supporting gesture, and he supported Luo Nan as they walked down step by step amidst the chaotic laughter of the students. Luo Nan's knee was injured, and he really was limping. The two were like this. They didn't dare to raise their heads, and they cut a sorry figure as they left the classroom. Luo Nan's absent-minded mind recovered a bit just before they left the room. He noticed one thing. The young female teaching assistant who had persuaded the lecturer was actually someone he knew. Tianxi. They hadn't contacted each other since the incident at Ocean Sky Cloud City. Presumably, Tianxi needed quite a long period of time to sort out her emotions. But he never expected that they would meet again in such a manner. Luo Nan didn't feel comfortable saying hello, so he left in a hurry with Xue Lei. But the bell rang before the elevator even reached the bottom floor. Luo Nan only found out after asking Xue Lei that it was the last class of the morning. This fact hurt Luo Nan quite a bit. Things wouldn't have escalated to this extent if he had been a few minutes late. His wristband vibrated at this time, and the name of the contact appeared. Luo Nan rushed to pick up the phone. "Senior Sister Tian, thanks for just now." The caller was none other than Tianxi. Her tone was gentle and calm, just like a friend she often interacted with. "It's nothing. Teacher Wu has a very good heart. She asked for your name, and she didn't scan it through the class system. That means that she wants you to open up. Otherwise, it would be hard to avoid deducting conduct points. That's all thanks to Senior Sister Tian's help. I'll treat you to a meal later." Luo Nan spoke in passing, and he suddenly felt that these words were very familiar. It seemed that he had said these words more than once in the past few days. Actually, this was normal. As his social range expanded, his interpersonal relationships gradually became more complex. It was hard to avoid social interactions. What other words could it be if he didn't say these words? Chapter 386. That's right. This was in line with Ocean Sky Cloud City's victim setting. Luo Nan thought this way, but when he heard the sigh, he felt quite subtle. His mind became much more lively and quick-witted. He immediately smiled and said, "Then Senior will treat me to a meal." Tian-si reacted extremely quickly. "Tonight? Today?" Luo Nan jumped in fright. "I have an event tonight." "Really?" Tian-si's tone was filled with doubt. Perhaps she was even a bit disappointed. This made Luo Nan feel embarrassed. His mind spun, and he suddenly had an idea. "Oh right. Senior, you should come and participate tonight." Tian-si was surprised. "Invite me?" "Yeah. You actually know them. It's Mo Peng and Mo Han. Remember? They're your cousins? Last time at Frost River Reality." Her voice suddenly cut off. Luo Nan's mind became more and more agile. He knew that Tian-si was probably a bit embarrassed. After all, the last event was to create an opportunity for her to socialize with Luo Nan's third cousin, Mo Chio. It seemed that nothing had come of it. It really wasn't that kind of thing to participate again. Well, with Luo Nan's social skills, this kind of slip-up was inevitable. Luo Nan didn't know how to remedy the situation when Tian-si chuckled. "Okay. I just happened to bring Tian-chi. He's close to your age. We had a good time last time. I heard that he keeps in contact with someone from your family." "Huh? Something like that happened?" Regardless of whether Tian-si was telling the truth or not, it was fine as long as she didn't mind. Luo Nan let out a sigh of relief. For him, this arrangement could be considered as killing two birds with one stone. Mo Peng and Mo Han were both devil incarnate level fellows. There should be someone older to suppress them. Tian-si had a socializing experience with Mo Chio, so she had an awkward halo. Let's see how those two fellows deal with this. Wasn't it a bit despicable to think like this? Luo Nan ended his communication with Tian-si and shook his head. His thoughts spun, but his expression sank. The event tonight was just a small matter. The extraordinary power and corresponding information that the Wraith sign transmitted just now were the key issues that needed to be carefully understood. Logically speaking, the Wraith sign was still in the Blood Flame Order's territory. He was herded every day, searching for other faced arachnid avatars to devour. From a city's safety perspective, the Wraith sign was a first-rate scavenger. This sort of action of the Wraith sign had brought quite a bit of trouble to Luo Nan in the past. The Wraith sign supported Luo Nan on the path of imbalance between body and soul, walking further and further. However, ever since Luo Nan constructed a clear framework of body and soul, coupled the rotation of the God Gear and Body Gear, the Wraith sign's sudden hunt and devour, the negative effects it brought to him grew smaller and smaller. Luo Nan was more than happy to leave the Wraith sign with the Blood Flame Order to collect some information and secrets. But in that instant, the Wraith sign exploded with an attack on the mental plane. It could be said to be the most intense attack Luo Nan had ever encountered since he received the Wraith sign. According to Luo Nan's conjecture and understanding, the instantaneous undulation was very much like when it suddenly encountered a powerful enemy. It unleashed its full combat power, then it won the battle and swallowed up the enemy. Only then did the comet collide with the Earth appear. The truly intense segment only lasted for an instant. Luo Nan didn't have the time to see it before he missed it. Later on, he was distracted by the embarrassing incident in the classroom. By the time he had the time to pay attention, the Wraith sign had already calmed down. Luo Nan could only see the Blood Flame Order's herder, Elder Mo Luan, from the Wraith sign's perspective. The herder was in the form of a black smoke soul body. He was flying swiftly and swiftly. However, the black smoke that was hard to see with the naked eye was scattered and indeterminate. Elder Mo Luan's condition was a bit of a mess. He should have been injured. Luo Nan had done some research on Elder Mo Luan recently. He knew that Elder Mo Luan was a core power of the Blood Flame Order. He was a dual cultivator of spells and martial arts. At his peak, he was an existence that even extraordinaries would cast sidelong glances at. Elder Emoluan was only 60 years old. He was only in the prime of his life. He should be at his peak. Unfortunately, he had suffered serious internal injuries during the split of the order. He had never been nimble, and it was even harder for him to break through the boundaries of extraordinaries. His bodily functions rapidly declined. In recent years, he had relied more on spells to support himself, but even so, he was able to suppress an elite of the society like old Mr. Bai. It was quite amazing, and if Elder Emoluan was truly forced into a corner, Elder Emoluan would ignite his life force and summon the blood flame will to descend. Elder Emoluan's combat strength was extremely terrifying. Then came the question: who could kill and injure this veteran B-rank power? It must be known that even He Wayne had borrowed the psychic wave network to invite President Ouyang to carry out a long-range attack. The result would have been the same. But if Elder Emoluan was at the level of President Ouyang, how could the Wraith Sign win in battle and devour him? Oh right, what did it devour again? The structure of Luo Nan's god gear was gradually stabilizing, but it was affected by the impact. The water level of the vast iceberg sea rose explosively, and there was a marvelous sensation of a sudden rise in temperature. He observed for a moment and discovered that this was the result of the friction and conflict between two sources of power. Clearly, the thing it devoured this time wasn't another human-faced arachnid's avatar, but something else. The difference in nature is quite large. After forcefully devouring it, digesting it is quite strenuous. Luo Nan guessed in a circle, but he was unable to come to a conclusion. It must be known that the Wraith Sign was intrinsically chaotic. It acted purely by instinct. It lived forever in the present. It had no concept of the past, the future, and it had no relevant memories. Luo Nan didn't know how to inspect the memories of his believers. Even if he knew, he wouldn't know where to start. He could only watch helplessly as Emoluan and the Wraith Sign secretly escaped into the distance. There was no other way. He could only give the Wraith Sign a reminder. He would immediately shift his consciousness whenever a clear change occurred on the other side. Noon was extremely tight and precious for Luo Nan and Shuelei. Naturally, they politely declined the school hospital. The two ate lunch after activating the extravasated blood in Luo Nan's knee. Then it was time for afternoon classes. Luo Nan cultivated in addition to the eye's orifice. He also cultivated in the mouth and tongue orifice. He had to take care of his internal organs, so the time required was longer. After everything was done, he only had a short period of time to take a nap. He closed his eyes and opened them again. He had to go to class. It was hard not to feel a bit emotional. Well, it could also be said to be grumbling. Morning, afternoon, and evening classes. It's not easy to persevere through them. My time is divided into 3 parts by these 3 classes. Of course, it would be great if I could cultivate wholeheartedly, but a slight change would make it hard to satisfy both sides. That's why. Why is it that many martial arts seniors like to go into seclusion once they reach a certain level? It's because they want to avoid the interference of the outside world to the greatest extent. However, since we're cultivating in this world, we will be affected by the turbid currents of the human world. How can we always follow the prescribed order and be smooth sailing? Cough. You can't use these words as an excuse. Got it, senior brother? Luo Nan groaned. He stretched his back on the trolley, and the bones, flesh, and tendons of his entire body crackled. The endless turbulence and the rising temperature of the vast ocean of icebergs was a bit lacking in stability. But when it coupled with the body gear, the interference force formed was much more active. Luo Nan had his afternoon classes earlier, but he felt the heart lantern burn brightly. The spiritual pool was overflowing. It followed the rise and fall of his vital energy. It was like a stream of snow melting under the spring sun. It seemed warm yet cold, and it revolved around his internal organs. His tempering suddenly increased by 20 to 30%. It could be said that he had received some nourishment. This was a sign that the eye's orifice and the mouth and tongue orifice were resonating with each other. Luo Nan originally thought that he would need at least 10 days of effort. He never thought that there would be results in less than 3 days. It had to be said that this was closely related to the great supplement pill that the Wraith sign had forcefully swallowed. Shuelei, who was next to Luo Nan, nodded over and over as he listened to the signs that appeared on Luo Nan's body. You've really entered the threshold of fleshly body tempering. Let's practice Sanzhou this afternoon. Let's spar. Luo Nan shot a glance at Shuelei's arm that could reach his thigh. He didn't respond to Shuelei's words. He just asked, "Tonight, the large activity area, Frost River Reality. You're going to?" Shuelei obviously wouldn't refuse. He even reminded Luo Nan, "Don't cause trouble. Leave early and go home." Cause trouble? Luo Nan shrugged. "It's done. Then I'll see you at gear. Let's practice Sanzhou first." Shuelei emphasized once more. "I have a class today. Doesn't that just leave notes on the most important people of the world?" "New class." Luo Nan blinked his eyes. He reached out and grasped the air. Then he opened his palm. A bead of water appeared to be stuck to his palm, but it was actually suspended in midair, spinning and spinning. There were only 2 classes in the afternoon, and they were related to writing. In any case, Luo Nan wasn't too interested in them. He didn't pay too much attention to the specifics. He just moved his finger slightly, letting the small bead of water revolve between his fingers. This bead of water was not the external neuron that had undergone a rebirth. It was condensed later. The condensation ring and the 5 auxiliary structures were complete. The bead of water swam across his fingertips like a blunt blade cutting across skin. It looked as if it could collapse at any time. This was not an illusion. If Luo Nan exerted a bit too much force with his fingers, it would be tantamount to placing a bomb on his fingertip. He would suffer. Luo Nan's control over his fleshly body was far from enough. If he practiced for too long, an accident would certainly occur. He completely relied on mental control. This was a relatively good training method. It was one of the daily cultivation techniques taught by Her Majesty Empress Wu in the intermediate training class in Xia City. But right now, Luo Nan's mind wasn't completely focused on it. The Wraith sign had just sent a signal. After over an hour of tossing and turning, the unlucky Elder Mo Luan had finally returned to his secret hideout. He was communicating with the others. This was a high-class member's suite of a large fitness center. The interior of the room was decorated in a purplish-red color. The lighting was dim, and it carried a bit of an exotic atmosphere. The room wasn't small, but there were only 2 wooden armchairs set up in the corner. Yoga mats were placed in most of the space. There was also a treadmill, a bicycle, an elliptical machine, and other equipment. There was also a small hot spring in the corner. Elder Mo Luan's fleshly body was already here. He sat cross-legged in the hot spring naked. However, Mo Luan's soul had yet to return to his body. His injuries had yet to heal. Perhaps returning to his body would allow him to recover a bit faster, but it would make his body, which was already full of hidden injuries, even worse. Mo Luan could only endure for a while. Mo Luan's soul floated in the room, and the Wraith sign was right next to him. There were 2 wooden armchairs in the room. One of them was empty, reserved for Mo Luan. Even if Mo Luan didn't sit, he still had to show respect. 6 core members of the Order had already received the news and were gathered here. Luo Nan was able to recognize all of these people after a month of intermittent identification. Chapter 387. Mrs. Halder was a woman that left a deep impression on people. Luo Nan had the temperament of a homebody. He didn't really recognize people, but he never forgot her from the first time he met her. Yes, it must be admitted that Mrs. Halder's image was quite good. She was around 40 years old, and she was in the gym room right now. She wore a deep purple knitted wool dress and stockings of the same color. She paired it with black velvet high heels. Her hair was tied up in a seemingly casual bun, and a few locks hung down the side of her forehead. She was elegant and concise, like a noble woman who had been in a high position for a long time. However, her somewhat westernized three-dimensional silhouette, her deep eye sockets, her quiet and serene gaze, and the strange slender bloody scar on her right cheek gave her a tough and callous aura. Upon closer inspection, she looked more like a strong woman who had experienced many experiences. In the secular world, she was indeed a queen of the business world. The high-class fitness center they were in right now was one of her businesses. She had inherited her husband's Castle Financial Group, and it had rapidly expanded over the past 10 years. She controlled several well-known fashion and sports brands, and her influence in the field of entertainment and sports grew more and more astonishing. Luonan had once looked up information on Mrs. Halder. She was a legendary figure in Xia City. During the Dark Age, when the Blood Flame Order was internally divided, the reigning chief ablatum of the Order cowered before the chaotic conflict of doctrines. This caused the Order's sacrificial vessel to be destroyed, causing irreparable losses. In the moment of life and death, it was this Mrs. Halder who beheaded the previous ablatum, her husband. Furthermore, with his strong conviction, he had withstood the violent backlash of the blood flame will. Amidst the raging blood flame, he had inherited the position of officiant. He had also relied on the rapidly expanding financial resources of the secular world to stabilize the situation during the Order's relatively weak stage, preserving this branch of the Blood Flame Order. The bizarre bloody scar on her right cheek was the mark of the ultimate trial of the Blood Flame will. It was the testimony of the soul-stirring events of the past. Due to her actions of beheading and killing her husband, she became known as the Black Widow of the inner world. Her reputation was terrible, but within the Blood Flame Order, her prestige was unparalleled. Practically everyone was awed by her unyielding and iron-blooded nature. Even a senior elder like Emoluan was extremely respectful toward her. At this moment, aside from Madame Halder, who was seated on a chair, everyone else was standing. Vice First Ablatum Yin Lu, who had once crossed paths with Luonan, leaned lightly on a treadmill beneath the floor-to-ceiling glass window of the wooden corridor outside. His body language was probably the calmest. She had started her career as Lady Halder's confidential secretary. Although she no longer held a position within the financial group, she was the person in charge of the Frost River Reality Project that the financial group had dispatched. In the secular world, her position was low, but she held great power. Within the Blood Flame Order, he was one of the successors that Madame Halder paid close attention to. Apart from Yin Lu, the strong man standing respectfully to Lady Halder's right was also an important figure in the church. His name was Meng Chong, and he was one of Madame Halder's trusted aides. He had once been a security captain. Some unreliable reports said that he was Lady Halder's lover, but in reality, Meng Chong was the only one in the Blood Flame Order, apart from Lady Halder and Elder Emoluan, who had passed the final trial of the Blood Flame will. Logically speaking, his physique should be on the monstrous level, but he was extremely low-key. He never participated in any sort of ranking, so it was very hard to make an accurate judgment. As for the other three, there was an old man with a scholarly air. He was another elder of the order, Jiang Yuanzhen. He was a standard member of the primitive religious sect. He was over a dozen years older than Moluan, but he was more skilled in theoretical work. His qualifications in the order were a bit worse than Emoluan's. Jiang Yuanzhen used to be an advisor type of character. Later, Lady Halder raised his position in the order. Although he was useless in terms of combat strength, it was precisely because of his and Emoluan's existence that this faction of the order gained a more orthodox atmosphere in this era of the collapse of sacrificial artifacts and conflicts of laws and logos. Right now, it was this old man who was the most anxious. He was not worried about the injured Emoluan, but about the wraith sign that was a substitute sacrificial artifact. Of course, in the Blood Flame Order, they called it the mold. How's the mold? Emoluan, Do you have any accurate information? How did you do it? Jiang Yuanzhen appeared to be very anxious and at a loss. He was a standard theorist. His own level of extraordinary power was only at the sea level. According to the observations and experiments of the order, under normal circumstances, the human-faced arachnid's clone would exist on the mental plane at the border of the abyss region and the polar domain. That was the special domain of extraordinaries or B-rank powerhouses who specialized in mental senses. Ordinary ability users were simply unable to sense it. It was only when hunting that the human-faced arachnid would approach the material world. In fact, strictly speaking, there was not a single person in the Bloodflame Order who fulfilled these two hard criteria. Lady Halder had gone through special channels to obtain the herding technique that could capture the human-faced arachnid's clone and forge it into a sacrificial artifact mold. Right now, only Lady Halder, Elder Mo Luan, Deputy Ablatum's Yin Lu, and Ren Hong could use this technique among the core members of the Order. Only these four people could see it under normal circumstances. Mo Luan could not stand this old fellow. He was disinclined to respond. Lady Halder was deep in thought, so she had no obligation to respond. Yin Lu was just about to respond when Ren Hong, who was close to Jiang Yuanzhen, spoke first. Old Jiang, the mold is very normal right now. It is currently digesting its food. The structure of the Blood Soul Temple has become more complete. The sound of blood and fire is very clear. Ren Hong's age was close to Lady Halder's. He was around 40 years old. His appearance was ordinary, but his words and actions were mature and appropriate. He normally did not reveal himself, but when he was preaching, he was extremely inciting. He was the backbone of the order purely by relying on its business. Normally, he would discuss the theories and preaching methods of the order with Jiang Yuanzhen. Their relationship was relatively close. Jiang Yuanzhen did not have any misgivings towards Ren Hong. At his age, he really was like a child. He grabbed Ren Hong like he was seizing a toy. He wished he could stomp his feet. "Let me hear it! Let me hear it!" Ren Hong glanced helplessly at Lady Halder. Lady Halder's eyelids drooped slightly. This could be considered as consent. "Don't take too long." Ren Hong first warned Jiang Yuanzhen before grabbing Jiang Yuanzhen's wrist. He adjusted the frequency of the fluctuations of his soul strength, bringing Jiang Yuanzhen's soul strength inside. It was like an amplifier, allowing Jiang Yuanzhen to listen to the sound that came from the depths of the mental plane. Blood, blood, blood. Fire, fire, fire. The monotonous, manic, and incessant sound was like a gradually rising platform that pressed down on the mental plane. Layer upon layer, there was no end to it. And because it was nothingness, it could collapse at any moment. After listening for a long time, one's internal organs would begin to convulse and contract. However, in Jiang Yuanzhen's ears, this sound was like the sound of nature. He laughed so hard that his eyebrows could not be seen. This is like eating a great tonic. The 2120 steps of the Bloody Soul Temple's Path of Blood Fire now has 1755 steps. Ren Hong confirmed the number, then reminded him, "Time's up." "How can it be so fast?" Jiang Yuanzhen wanted to act shamelessly, but Ren Hong gently and firmly refused Jiang Yuanzhen's request and even pulled away. Jiang Yuanzhen wanted to toss and turn again, but Ren Hong gave him a meaningful glance, reminding him that the Lord Ablatum was right in front of him. Jiang Yuanzhen had been raised by Mrs. Halder, so he was afraid in his heart. His face twitched and he finally stopped pulling. He turned to face the master seat and smiled. Then he began to count with a deadpan expression. Last time Mo Luan reported the number of steps to be 1569. My goodness, this time it's 186 steps? Yin Lu reminded him from the side, "Old Jiang, there was a successful hunt last week that didn't make the report. At that time, it was already 1605 steps. A whole 150 steps is too much. Especially the Blood Flame Path, which starts at the end of the 1600 step. Even if it can't compare to the final 120 steps of the Bloodflame altar, it still isn't easy to construct. What in the world is this thing? It's so powerful. If Luonan hadn't used the Wraith sign to spy on the high-level communications of the Bloodflame Order, he would certainly have been completely baffled. Actually, the so-called Bloodflame Path was the quantitative standard of the Bloodsoul Temple structure that the Bloodflame Order had implanted into the human-faced arachnid's avatar. It was divided into 6 levels. The first 400 steps were a stage, and the last 120 steps were the final sublimation stage. Not only did it have numerical quantification, it also had an image. Right now, the hell-like structure that had been assimilated into the Wraith Sign's body was piled up layer by layer from the center. It was like a mountain peak of cooled lava. The mountain path on top of the mountain twisted and turned. There were many pores in the mountain rocks, and lava flowed and spat out. It could be described as a river of lava and a stream of fire. It could change the mountain's terrain and shape at any time. But no matter how it changed, there was a majestic and awe-inspiring building at every certain height on the mountain. It was either a palace hall or a cave. They were built next to the mountain, as if they were one entity. This was the embryonic form of the Bloodsoul Temple. Right now, 4 buildings had been formed, representing that 4 stages had been completed. The next 5th stage was the formation of the altar on the mountain peak. The final 6th stage was the 120 steps of the Bloodflame altar. Through the blood sacrifice, the Bloodflame will was internalized into the entire mountain peak, thus forming the complete appearance of the Bloodsoul Temple. Luonan lacked a deep understanding of secret orders, but he could tell from his senses that this entire process was a step-by-step process. It was quite standardized. Aside from herding, there were endless sacrifices and refinements every day. They were mysterious and contained magical powers, reflecting the accumulation of the Bloodflame Order's laws and logos. As an internal member of the Bloodflame Order, she naturally did not view the problem as simply as Luonan. Jiang Yuanjin had been worrying about the future construction of the Bloodsoul Temple. The first 2,000 steps are fine. The 120 steps of blood sacrifice are the most difficult. Just based on the current scale of the order, it is a bit strenuous to perform sacrifices day and night. If we could have this kind of sacrifice. Ren Hong also agreed. That's right. The Order of Justice acted earlier than us. It is said that before En Weng's accident, the Order of Justice had already sent the human-faced arachnid to headquarters. In other words, no matter how we graze in Xia City, it will be hard to gather a complete human-faced arachnid. If we want the mold to be effective, it is hard to avoid seeking other methods. Right now, it looks like the mold's devouring ability still has room for expansion. This is a good thing. Yinlu was a bit more pessimistic. It's hard to make a judgment just by looking at an example. Jiang Yuanjin clapped her hands. You'll have to ask Emoluan about this. It was dangerous this time, but if we can really find a way to assist in the blood sacrifice, then it would truly be a boundless merit. Just as her voice fell, a mass of light and shadow unfurled in the center of the room. Emoluan did not participate in the conversation from start to finish. He just transformed the relevant memories into energy information that could be recognized by specialized equipment. Then he transformed it into an image, allowing the core members of the Order to understand the situation at the time. This sort of ability to reproduce memories seemed simple, but in reality, only those who had a deep understanding of the mind and the soul could do it. Luonan felt ashamed of his inferiority to Emoluan's deep and ruthless ability. As the light and shadow changed, it was tantamount to replaying Emoluan's experience at the time. Due to the nature of human thought, it was hard to avoid subconscious processing and distortions. However, it was enough to serve as a reference. Luonan found the scene of the incident familiar. He thought about it carefully and recognized that this was the recycling stratum of the Twin River District. This place was filled with gangs and negative emotions. It was indeed one of the best places for the human-faced arachnid to reside. Emoluan gave a brief introduction of the background. He used the mental plane to directly transmit telepathically. However, Luonan could hear everything clearly due to the mental connection between him and the wraith sign. I was just doing my routine patrol at the time. Mold suddenly became very excited. I thought that it had discovered prey, so I immediately went over. But then I saw a bird. It wasn't a bird, right? Jiang Yuanjin relied on his age to speak more casually with Emoluan. Emoluan didn't bicker with him. He responded calmly, indeed. I only discovered that it wasn't a bird when I got closer. It was a wing-hand bloodbat. Wing-hand bloodbat. Actually, Luonan was already stupefied when he saw the image. Emoluan's explanation only gave him a confirmation. It really was a wing-hand bloodbat. Luonan had participated in the Trigate Security Conference last week. This was the first thing that was introduced. Luonan had the deepest impression of it. He knew that this thing possessed a highly contagious virus. It was a mutated type, and it could even control biological aberrations. It possessed an extremely high level of threat. Among the rewards provided by Trigate Security, this thing's corresponding bonus was ranked at the top. It couldn't be this coincidental, right? Luonan found it a bit hard to accept this astonishing coincidence for a time. However, he found it even harder to imagine that such a dangerous aberration had other channels to enter and exit Xia City at any time. If this really was the case, then the world line would change into Resident Evil. If it really was the target that Trigate Security mentioned, then wouldn't there be any dregs left after the Wraith Sign made his move? Trigate Security had said that the Wraith Sign wanted to capture the Winghand Bloodbat alive and retrieve the corpse if it was dead. Well, it didn't matter if it was the Wraith Sign or Emoluan's out-of-body state. They were just wandering around on the mental plane. Even if they killed the Winghand Bloodbat, they shouldn't have taken the corpse away. Luonan immediately became excited. He stared fixedly at the image of light and shadow. He wanted to find the surrounding landmark buildings and confirm the coordinate. However, as he carefully observed, Luonan felt that the image was a bit strange. He didn't know what was strange about it for a time. Jiang Yuanjin was also very shocked. It really is a Winghand Bloodbat? How did this thing enter the city? Even the city guards are blind. Oh, it seems a bit different? Emoluan answered. It really is different from the species found in the wilderness. Actually, I've always wondered if this thing can even be considered a Winghand Bloodbat. The image of light and shadow just happened to give them a close-up view. This time, whether it was the group of core members of the Blood Flame Order up close or Luonan, who was 2 or 3 city districts away, they all saw the problem. Chapter 388. Too tough. This was Jiang Yuanjin's evaluation. It could be said that she was right on the mark. This Winghand Bloodbat was a lot thinner than the image data Luonan had seen. Luonan still remembered the countless number of Winghand Bloodbats fluttering under the setting sun in the information provided by Trigate Security. Though they weren't large in size, every single one of them was like a savage and powerful canine. Their 4 claws were sharp, their muscles were solid, and their fur was glossy and smooth. Their skin and bat wings were a bit dim, but they were powerful in their flaps. One look and one could tell that they weren't easy to mess with. However, the one Emoluan encountered was a typical symptom of dysplasia. Its wingspan was at most 20 centimeters, and it was shriveled and skinny. Only its eyes were blood red, giving it the feeling of extreme insanity. It wasn't even 11:30 in the morning at the time. It was the end of the day on the recycling stratum, the time when the visible light was the most. This Winghand Bloodbat shuttled back and forth between the sunlight and the shadows. Its skin and bat wings let out a strange sound when they flapped. According to the information provided by Trigate Security, this Winghand Bloodbat was in estrus. Of course, it was unable to find its own kind to satisfy it within the boundaries of Xia City. This made it all the more irritable. Perhaps it was this kind of emotion that attracted the human-faced arachnid to discover its target. The wraith sign immediately pounced over restlessly. Unfortunately, these two vicious creatures weren't dealing with the problem of estrus. They were engaged in a life-and-death battle. From the perspective of a normal person, they would at most see the bat shadow circling in the air. They wouldn't be able to see the deeper mysteries. However, the light and shadow displayed Mo Luan's memories of the time. The levels and details were far richer. This was the first time Luo Nan saw an ability user's memories of the mental plane. He couldn't take his eyes off it for a time. The conflict between the two sides erupted in an extremely direct manner. The wraith sign revealed a human face and an arachnid body. It had 6 eyes and 8 feet, and a chaotic and berserk mental attack radiated out. The wing-hand bloodbat's reaction was a bit slower, but its counterattack was extremely fierce. It didn't use its claws and other substantial weapons. Only its eyes deepened by a shade, and a dazzling bloody mist soared from its body. Thousands of human faces could be vaguely seen as it soared. There were also strange demonic shadows interweaving, treacherous and savage. Such a situation greatly exceeded everyone's expectations. Therefore, even though Jiang Yuanjun knew that this was a scene reenactment, she still cried, "Ah!" from the gym. At this moment, Mo Luan's perspective was very close. It was clear that Mo Luan was also very surprised at that time and unconsciously moved closer to observe. The wraith sign showed its incredible fighting instinct. Facing the bloody smoke, it withdrew its explosive spiritual attack instantly, and the void outside its body was twisted. Perhaps it was because the bloody soul temple inside had gradually grown in scale, but it was already showing signs of interfering with the material world. At first glance, the momentum seemed to be slightly weaker, but in terms of endless depth, it was far superior. It was simply like a miniature black hole. The result of the collision between the two sides also proved this point. The blood smoke and cloud chi collided with the outer edge of the distorted void and involuntarily twisted. It lost its burning momentum and was trapped and swallowed up. In a breath's time, there was not much left. As for the wraith sign, his demonic body instantly swelled in size. Luo Nan thought that this was the moment the wraith sign delivered the meteorite. At this point, it could only be said that the devil sign had won. However, no one expected that the wraith bloodbat would lose most of its blood smoke and cloud chi. Instead, its viciousness was aroused. Its body that was as thin as a match suddenly expanded, becoming as round as a ball. It simply didn't give the wraith bloodbat a chance to react. It exploded with a bang and a bloody mist sprayed everywhere. The hearts of everyone watching the video trembled, including Luo Nan. In his eyes, it wasn't the wraith bloodbat that exploded. It was a million. It was this bloody mist that made even the rampaging wraith sign vigilant. He directly escaped into the depths of the mental plane, temporarily hiding. On the other hand, Mo Luan was too close. He was sprayed head-on by the remnants of the bloody mist. His field of view swayed in an instant, and his energy became chaotic. The video ended there. So it turns out that we were caught in the crossfire. Jiang Yuanjun let out a breath, dispelling her nervous mood. There was a bit of mockery in her tone. However, she soon said in distress, "I was just thinking that if the wraith bloodbat was useful, we could go to the wilderness and kill around. It wouldn't be any worse than a blood sacrifice. But after watching for so long, it seems that something isn't right?" It really wasn't right. Everyone present was a veteran ability user. They had gone to the wilderness at least a dozen or so times. The wraith bloodbat wasn't some rare species. Everyone had encountered them before. However, they had never seen the wraith bloodbat in Mo Luan's memories. The wraith bloodbat used the blood mist as an attack method. Moreover, if something went wrong, the wraith bloodbat would immediately self-destruct. It could even injure a veteran B-rank power. Are there any left behind? Mrs. Halder cut to the chase at this time. In an instant, the gym entered its most serious state. Emoluen understood what Mrs. Halder meant. She was asking if there were any samples of the force of the impact that injured him. Generally speaking, this was a very difficult matter, but Emoluen answered. There are. An extremely fine thread of blood, like a gossamer thread, appeared out of thin air as he spoke. Actually, it was sent out by Emoluen's soul body to appear before everyone's eyes. When this thread of blood was sent out, it was only a millimeter in length. But its diameter was even thinner. It was like a broken spider silk. If it wasn't for the brilliance of the bloody light, people with old eyes like Jiang Yuanjin wouldn't have been able to see it clearly. The nature of the thread of blood was extremely strange. It had only appeared in front of people for a few seconds, but it seemed to swell a bit and elongate a bit. Moreover, it twisted its head and swayed its tail like a living bug. Emoluen spoke of the results of his observations during this time. For now, I am unable to define the mode of existence of this thing. It appeared within the blood of the wing-hand vampire bat, but now it exists on the mental plane. It endlessly devours and paralyzes soul bodies, rapidly growing stronger. He was still looking for an adjective when Mrs. Halder cut to the chase. A biological fission reproduction. A kind of mental microorganism, or perhaps a virus. Jiang Yuanjin suddenly clapped his hands. A human-faced arachnid. Everyone understood what he meant. Yinlu unconsciously stood up straight. It really is similar. Could it be a Darksider species? A species that we have never discovered before? A Darksider species? Luonan, who could be called the best listener, suddenly became interested. This thing was a Darksider species? If this really was the case, then it would be the second species that he had seen with his own eyes. Luonan had studied the human-faced arachnid in detail during this period of time, but it didn't yield any results. The Darksider species or Darksider life form was a new concept in and of itself. It hadn't even been 2 years since it was proposed. A complete system had yet to be formed, and the amount of information was pitifully small. Luonan suspected that with his understanding of the human-faced arachnid, he could list a few phenomena and write a paper. He would receive treatment from a top journal, and he would earn so many honor points within the society that his hands would go limp. Therefore, he still had to rely on himself for everything. Luonan discovered that this blood virus was quite different from the human-faced arachnid through his observations. It was just as Emoluen said. This thing's stance was quite ambiguous. It switched back and forth between the material plane and the mental plane. Essentially speaking, this was because its living environment was at the juncture between the mental and the material plane. It was an amphibious species. From the results of his current observations, the roots of its growth and strength were all on the mental plane. It didn't have the ability to absorb nutrients from the material world. However, it was unable to dive deeper into the mental plane. According to the conventional division of the inner world of 3 zones, 1 region, and 1 domain, this thing could only move about in the topmost layer of the shallow zone. It was like a mosquito larva on the surface of the water. But if it continued to split and reproduce, then it would be hard to say. After all, it could injure Emoluen, but it couldn't rely on its current abilities. Luonan could sense that the Wraith sign, who had been resting idly in the depths of the mental plane after Emoluen released the blood virus, aroused its instinctive attention. But perhaps it saw that this thing was too weak. It wasn't enough to fill the gaps between its teeth, so it lost interest. Perhaps it wanted to raise it? While Luonan was researching, the others weren't idle either. It's also a parasitic species? Renhong tried to make a judgment. So to speak, that wing-hand vampire bat is actually a victim host? Is this parasitic relationship a designated one, or is it an arbitrary choice? Perhaps he just wanted to express his thoughts, but the meaning behind his words was like a cold wind that blew the atmosphere in the room cold. With the complexity of mutants and the pitiful depth of human research, it wasn't strange to suddenly discover a new species, especially the Darksider species that came and went without a trace. However, the situation of being parasitized still made people feel unhappy. In the research of mutants, parasitic and symbiotic relationships were actually quite common. During the craziest mutant era, large quantities of insects and microbes on Earth suffered from warped mutations. They evolved into similar abilities, bringing about an extremely terrifying chaos. There were often people who said that the ability users that appeared in the new era were products of a kind of parasitic and symbiotic relationship. They were mutations caused by special viruses entering the host cells. But it was very hard for people to accept this theory. As humans who possessed high levels of intelligence, they instinctively loathed this sort of image that threatened their self-awareness. 9 out of 10 Darksider species are parasitic. There's no need to say too much. Lady Halder ignored her own instincts with her powerful willpower. She focused her gaze on the swimming blood virus before her eyes. After observing it seriously for a period of time, she spoke softly. It uses the blood essence of the fleshly body to drive a viral fission on the mental plane. This sort of interference method seems berserk, but it's actually precise and mysterious. Is it that hard to get rid of? For me, it would take a few days. It shouldn't be hard if I'm careful, but if I increase the number of samples, then I'll need to observe it. How's the scene? I've already arranged for people to protect it. But due to its nature, I haven't begun to collect samples for now. Come with me again. Yes. No one else had the leeway to interrupt the conversation between the two core figures of the Order. Only when the principles for handling the matter were decided did Lady Halder change the topic. With Emoluan's condition, it won't be suitable for him to continue herding for a period of time in the future. We need to adjust the candidate. Everyone discussed this. Everyone's expressions were solemn. What Lady Halder said was a very realistic matter. The founding ceremony of the Blood Flame Order was on December 21st. There were only 40 days left until today. The mold for the Blood Soul Temple had just reached the 5th stage. The progress was smooth, but it could not be interrupted no matter what. In reality, as the human-faced arachnid incident receded and the hunting operation continued, it became more and more difficult to search for the human-faced arachnid's clone in Xia City. The slightest bit of slack could bring irreparable negative effects to the reconstruction of the sacrificial artifact. The reason why Lady Halder was interested in the parasite on the body of the Winghand Bloodbat was because she saw a possible alternative plan. But before she could confirm the feasibility of this plan, she still had to complete the most basic of tasks. Jiang Yuanzhen coughed. Relying on his age, he opened his mouth and listed out the matters that didn't have much significance, but they still had to be considered. The herding law in our hands has already appointed 4 shepherds. Aside from Emoluan, there are the Lord Ablatum and 2 deputy Ablatums. There are 3 candidates, but considering that the Lord Ablatum needs to prepare for the sacrificial ceremony and coordinate with the Blood Flame will every day, it is hard for him to split his time. So there are only 2 candidates, Yinlu and Renhong. Which one do you choose? Lady Halder asked directly. Renhong. Jiang Yuanzhen's response was very decisive. She even gave Yinlu a glare. Yinlu is running around outside every day. She's tied up with mundane matters. How could she have the time to herd? Yinlu smiled bitterly and lowered her head. She didn't want to argue with this old man. According to Jiang Yuanzhen's thoughts, as a deputy Ablatum, she should devote her entire body and mind to teaching affairs. As for the business matters, there would naturally be professionals to handle them. For this reason, the old man gave Yinlu quite a bit of face. Renhong? Lady Halder seemed to be muttering to herself, but she also seemed to be asking. Renhong was a bit unsure of her intentions, but he still lowered his head and said, I am willing to temporarily take over the matter of herding. I will listen to the Ablatum's arrangements. Lady Halder declined to comment. She continued to call out names. Meng Chong. Meng Chong responded bluntly, I'm not good at it. I have no objections. Yinlu? Enlu was the person involved. She could only say, "I will listen to the boss's instructions." She continued her habits from her days as a confidential secretary. She didn't refer to the Lord Ablatum as the boss. Lady Halder's gaze swept across everyone in the room. In the end, her gaze stopped on the face of the person who had been silent all this time. Wu Kuei. Wu Kuei was an ordinary man who could be drowned in the crowd at any time. His stature was short and stout, and he had no sense of existence at all. Luonan had observed him for a long time, but Luonan still didn't know what Wu Kuei did. Luonan didn't know what Wu Kuei relied on to rise to the core of the Bloodflame Order. Wu Kuei's words weren't unique either. Let the Ablatum make the decision. This wasn't the first time Luonan had seen this sort of situation. Right now, Lady Halder's words were practically the law of the Bloodflame Order. Aside from Jiang Yuanjun, who purely researched theory and didn't have any schemes, always relying on his seniority to say a few words, the others generally didn't have their own opinions. Mo Luan suddenly butted in at this time. I feel that something isn't quite right. The matter of coordinating the will of the Bloodflame is something that not only you, but also Ren Hong. Right now he's the main force of preaching. The 40th anniversary ceremony of the establishment of the order is just around the corner. He has to participate in a series of warm-up ceremonies. This is unavoidable. Jiang Yuanjun retorted, in the end, he isn't the Ablatum. Squeezing out a bit of time should be fine. The problem is that the Blood Soul Temple has already established a connection with the outside world after entering the 5th phase. They are more sensitive to psychic wave interference. Which of the recent ceremonies hasn't had powerful psychic waves? They also need to mobilize the will of the blood flame. All of these things may affect the structure and growth of the Blood Soul Temple. Even if it's hard to judge whether it's positive or negative, do we really need to take this risk before the blood sacrifice? Jiang Yuanjun's expression changed slightly when she heard this. She immediately changed her words. We have to be on guard. Lady Halder nodded slightly. Then it's Enlo. A bunch of words were said, but in the end it was Lady Halder who made the final decision. Mo Luan would always provide the best reason for her to speak. These were the rules of discussion of the Blood Flame Order. Lady Halder's gaze turned to Enlo. December 21st is the ceremony of the establishment of the Order. Nothing can go wrong. For the next few days, hand over the affairs in your hands that can be handed over. Don't think too much. I will send Meng Chong to follow you. You must ensure that nothing goes wrong. Chapter 389. The matter with the Blood Flame Order came to an end, but Luonan could not help feeling a bit vexed. It was getting harder and harder for him to dismount. It could be seen that the core members of the Blood Flame Order were extremely determined. They were all aiming to reconstruct the sacrificial vessel during the establishment ceremony. However, due to a freak combination of factors, the Wraith sign had replaced their original mold. This was an irreversible process. If he took back the Wraith talisman now, the Blood Flame Order would become a great enemy, and they would not rest until one of them was dead. However, if he dragged it on, it would only be a temporary peace. He would have to take it back sooner or later, and the longer he dragged it on, the more headache he would have. Unless he gave up the Wraith sign, but how was that possible? Luonan tossed this vexing problem to the back of his mind for the time being. He thought about how Mrs. Halder was going to investigate the scene. He wanted to go as well. Even if the 1 million had already exploded, as long as he could find some clues, it would still be helpful for the investigation later. Luonan did his best to recall the video data, searching for the relevant area. Thanks to the powerful network search function of the Information Age and the consciousness search function of the Hexier, even if it was just an impression, he would soon get the answer. He still felt that it wasn't enough, so he used his authority to use the real-time street view mode on the psychic wave network to adjust the public cameras and confirm it again. The order of the recycling stratum was terrible. Most of the relevant cameras had been destroyed, but Luo Nan spent a bit of time piecing together the images. He was able to find the area where the incident most likely occurred, and he discovered a glaring pool of blood there. At this moment, there were people taking pictures in the surroundings, all of them very carefully. This is the place. According to what Emoluan said, he had already arranged for people to deal with the scene. That was why it was said that this kind of old man was the most annoying. Luo Nan wanted to eat the first bite of soup, but he was afraid that it would be too much. Glancing at his watch, the first class was about to end. After class, he would find a quiet place and enter an out-of-body state. It would only take him a minute or two to reach the River Wu district. Luo Nan's plan was quite good, and the preliminary work was quite in place. But the true big boss was unwilling to cooperate. On the podium, the cultured lecturer of the writing class said, "Let's not end the class. For the rest of the time, let's practice in class. It's a very basic character logic." "Teacher, I want to leave my body." Luo Nan had to kneel when faced with the reality that he had to attend writing classes in a row and that there would be tests. Even if he wanted to sleep on the table, he couldn't. What to do? Given Madame Halder's shrewdness, there wouldn't be anything left of her once she arrived at the scene. Luo Nan's mind was in a mess, but the teacher didn't care about him. She directly threw out the requirements for writing practice. The goal of the practice was character logic. There were a series of requirements. The student had to make sure that the words they wrote corresponded with each other. The initial requirement was simple: describe an impressive person. Make sure you know the person well. Family, friends, and classmates were all fine. He could start with a description of their appearance. Of course, this involved a series of details such as the shape of the face, mouth, nose, eyes, eyebrows, beard, and so on. The Luo Nan of 2 months ago might have had a narrow range of choices, but it was much easier now. He had chosen Shuelei, whom he had interacted with the longest. Yes, Shuelei was closer to the understanding of normal people. Shuelei was his target. The writing teacher must have a prying eye. Following that, there was a series of information such as address, health, family, education, love, marriage, history, religious orientation, actions, and thought patterns. Finally, the interaction with the target should also be listed, such as specific instances of helping or sabotaging each other's actions. There was a commotion in the classroom. Did this mean that their friendship was over? Luo Nan wrote in a very relaxed manner. It was like a sketch pieced together from words. This was his advantage. At most, he only needed to consider the content that exceeded normal thinking and logic. Perhaps Luo Nan was affected by this relaxed state, but the key points in his mind suddenly opened. As he wrote and wrote, his train of thought flew away from Shuelei. It was just like what his teacher had always tried to express. Characters were a collection of social relationships. A single person's ability was limited. The help of friends and social cooperation were the only ways to increase efficiency. Why did he have to think of such an inefficient method like skipping class? His train of thought was clear. His writing might not be divine, but he knew what to do next. A strand of his mind was thrown out, and ink responded dozens of kilometers away. Luo Nan didn't have the time to pay attention to the progress of Trigate Securities' operation over the past 2 days. He just divided a bit of his mind to ensure that ink was obedient. Actually, the official search mission had already begun on Sunday. Right now, it was the free time for professionals. Peony and Long 7 had split up to lead a group of people to collect clues. They would summarize and analyze the clues every day, but there had been no progress so far. In other words, luck was very important. Luo Nan activated the telepathic thought he left on Ink's body, and his consciousness descended. Ink was already used to this. It flapped its wings twice, expressing its welcome. Luo Nan's consciousness had just arrived, and he had yet to do proper business when he first felt a bit of peculiarity. Since Ink had a relatively low level of intelligence, Luo Nan's telepathic thought descended without any pressure. He didn't need to worry about anything. He had the most connections, and the corresponding feeling was the most familiar. Because of this, he immediately felt that something was different when his telepathic thought moved. It was like listening to a familiar song. The singer was the same, but there was a clear difference between the live version and the studio version. It looked like the effects of his 2-day closed-door training over the weekend were greater than he had imagined. Speaking of which, Luo Nan had gone from the fundamental format pyramid to the structure of the living starry sky with clairvoyance. From his internal organs, 9 orifices, and 6 roots to the state of his soul body, all of them had undergone relatively significant changes. This sort of change was all-encompassing. The resulting effects involved the structure of Luo Nan's body and soul, as well as all aspects of his internal and external connections. But because the effects were too broad, many things could only be experienced after actual contact. For example, ink. After the format pyramid transformed into a star atlas, the connection between Luo Nan and his believers was no longer shackled by materialization. In fact, Luo Nan had become much clearer on an intrinsic level. He discovered at this moment that his observations on the mental plane had already taken on the mode of a telescope due to the effects of the atrium cyclotron 2 days ago. Through warping and weaving mental curtains, Luo Nan could obtain high-definition information from afar using a special format. This was the most crucial reason for the substantial increase in his mental sensing ability in recent times. Before, Luo Nan had only considered the changes brought to him by the telescope mode. Now he saw that ink had become an important fulcrum and reference in this mode. It was like a Cepheid variable star in the universe. Astronomers borrowed its light cycle to modify parameters and measure interstellar distances with greater precision. But from Luo Nan's perspective, every detail seemed to have exceeded his requirements for precision after being modified by ink. So much so that he only had a vague feeling that he was unable to accurately describe it. What sort of reasoning was this? Ink became a bit excited due to the existence of Luo Nan's telepathic thought. But no one else could understand its mood. Peony and the others were on the platform of a tall building in the Forest Wall district right now. They were using viewing binoculars to scan the city district. Ink stood on the binoculars, its claws digging into the outer shell. It was fine if it didn't move, but once it moved, it caused the lens to shake greatly. It was very hard to observe. Peony didn't even raise her head. She continued to use the binoculars to look around, but her slender fingers accurately found the target. She lightly flicked Ink's thick beak. "Mr. Ink, do you have any thoughts?" It carried a bit of childishness, but it also seemed to be teasing. In the classroom, Luo Nan subconsciously rubbed his mouth. He finally recovered from the changes in his ultra-precise perception. He connected the rubber band on Ink's ankle to communicate with Peony. He didn't really know how to deal with this woman, so he simply spoke his coordinate. "Go here." Peony stopped adjusting the binoculars' direction. She straightened her body and focused her gaze on Ink. She raised her eyebrows slightly, and a rarely seen expression of astonishment appeared on her face. Then she communicated with her soul strength. "You've discovered something? Are you sure? Where's the source of the information? How could Luo Nan tell her?" He couldn't find any other reason, so he simply shut his mouth and didn't answer. He wanted to say, "Do as you see fit," but he was afraid that Peony would retort back, so he simply had Ink close its eyes and pretend to be confused. Only after doing all of this did he come to a realization. Peony knew that there was someone behind Ink. "Close your eyes, my ass." Luo Nan was greatly embarrassed. There was no need to mention how to remedy the situation. However, Peony didn't get angry. She snapped her fingers and spoke to the support personnel of Trigate Security beside her. "We're going to change the location." "Oh, the effects are great." This was probably the fabled version of "Do as you see fit." Ink still had the appearance of pretending to be asleep. Actually, he had completely absorbed the changes in the outside world and transmitted it back. Luo Nan's mind exploded with joy when he saw that an elite character like Peony, who was hard to grasp, was going to act according to his thoughts. Then he suddenly recalled that there were still people from the Blood Flame Order there. Soon, Haldev and Emoluan would arrive as well. He wanted to warn Luo Nan, but if he did this, his previous act would immediately collapse. After a moment of hesitation, Luo Nan found a reason for himself. Let Trigate Security make contact with the Blood Flame Order. Maybe they can get more information? Oh, this idea isn't bad. The work efficiency of Trigate Security was quite high. When they heard Peony say that they had a clue, they immediately dispatched a low-altitude aircraft. They only used 12 minutes to complete the transfer. When Peony and the group of support personnel arrived at the target location Luo Nan mentioned, they arrived a bit faster than Mrs. Haldev and the others, who were quite far away. Mrs. Haldev didn't move forward after seeing Peony and the others arrive. She just let the on-site management personnel of the order negotiate with Trigate Security. As for how Luo Nan knew, the Wraith sign wasn't involved in this. That fellow had already changed his breeder, and was currently recuperating at the headquarters of the Blood Flame Order. Luo Nan relied on Ink. Ink flapped its wings and flew up, circling within the shadows of the tall building. Behind the tightly sealed doors and windows, pairs of eyes stared at this enormous bird. They were either excited or terrified. Luo Nan himself didn't know that this crow was a celebrity in the recycling stratum of the River Wu district. News of the great battle with Jack a month ago had spread through the ubiquitous criminal channels of this place. The residents who lived here more or less knew that a powerful and mysterious power had crushed the Jack Mafia that originally occupied this place. The main force of the mysterious power was a burly man. This was too lacking in uniqueness, so people took the initiative to choose a more legendary symbol, a large crow. The mysterious power had the special ability to control crows. Every time a crow's cry was heard, a calamity would descend, causing one's mind to go insane and fall unconscious. Jack Mafia's well-equipped sniper squad was easily defeated in this way. In the end, the mysterious power didn't take control of the recycling stratum. The territory of the Jack Mafia was divided among other powers, large and small. However, due to the free and unrestrained behavior of the mysterious power, the surrounding residents, who had been tossed and turned by the gangs for a long time, unconsciously felt a bit of reliance on the mysterious power. Perhaps the mysterious power taking control of the recycling stratum would bring about a completely different and new life? Driven by such emotions, the reappearance of the enormous crow caused a considerable portion of the residents of the recycling stratum to feel a surge of emotion. It also caused a large number of gang members, who had gathered here due to the unknown value of the scene of the incident, to tremble with fear. Luo Nan didn't understand the cause and effect, but he could feel the actual psychological effect that Ink's appearance brought to the surrounding people. If the mental state of the surrounding people could be said to be a sprinkling of magnetic sand before, then Ink, who was shuttling back and forth between the shadows of the tall buildings, was like a powerful magnet. No matter where the magnetic sand was scattered, it would stand erect, aiming the magnetic poles of the opposite direction at Ink's location. From the perspective of the living starry sky, hundreds and thousands of stars were affected by the gravitational pull of Ink's constellation. They moved in unison, incomparably uniform. At the same time, the stars that weren't affected by the magnetic force were especially eye-catching. A considerable portion of them had a corresponding uniform displacement pattern. It was just that they were incompatible with the system Luo Nan had set up. The source of some patterns could be seen with a single glance. For example, the people of Trigate Security obeyed Peony's orders and obeyed the arrangements of their superiors. They were like galaxies revolving around a binary star system. There were also some patterns that couldn't be seen. For example, the on-site personnel of the Blood Flame Order didn't even know where the big shots of the Order were. But they were members of the Blood Flame Order in the end. Their long years of activity in the order caused an extremely subtle connection to exist between their energies and the blood flame will and the first ablatum. In the living starry sky with Luo Nan's self-format as the core and the clear order, these connections were like pedestrians that violated the traffic rules and randomly entered the flow of traffic. They brought about chaos of varying sizes, but they were clearly distinguishable, even though the distance spanned by the connections exceeded the limits of Ink's perception and exceeded the range of the living starry sky. But when all the intruders walked in the same direction, all the connections converged in a relatively fixed region. Luo Nan was naturally able to guess. There was a dark star there that was hard to see with the naked eye. It was releasing an invisible and powerful gravitational pull. Ink circled around twice before quietly expanding its flight trajectory outward. It gradually brought the possible locations of the dark star into the range of Ink's senses. A dozen or so seconds later, a dark nebula that was hard to pry into appeared within the living starry sky. Chapter 390. So mental senses could be used in this way? Luo Nan's train of thought opened up. The clairvoyance mode of the telescope was clearly a sort of systematic clairvoyance. Every believer, including Ink, was a node. They provided perceptual planes and details that could be mutually referenced and supplemented. Although the number of details might not be perfect, they reflected each other. According to the framework of formatting theory, they formed a relatively closed system that covered more and more layers. In this way, all existences that were not part of the system became especially prominent. No matter how minute the reverse arteries and veins were, they would be magnified, making his senses exceptionally sharp. There was no one else like this method in terms of early warning function. Mrs. Halder certainly saw Ink. Perhaps she knew that this crow was extraordinary, but she absolutely could not imagine that there was another person who was several dozen kilometers away, using this crow to observe her. There was another person at the scene who was very sensitive. It was Peony. She must have sensed Ink's abnormal flight trajectory. She raised her head to look. It was unknown how she judged it, but her gaze soon pointed toward the skyscraper where Mrs. Halder was, as well as the relevant floors. From Luo Nan's angle, he felt that there seemed to be a confrontation of gazes between Peony and Mrs. Halder. It was hard for Luo Nan to judge whether or not Peony saw Mrs. Halder, but Mrs. Halder's gaze was certainly locked onto Peony. Well, you're the scapegoat. Luo Nan felt the secret delight of successfully shifting the blame after getting into trouble. He also felt a corresponding sense of accomplishment. This was the first time in his entire life. He wasn't worried about Peony's safety. After all, the most powerful woman in Xia City stood behind her. Mrs. Halder's Blood Flame Order and the Castle Financial Group were admittedly powerful forces in Xia City, but they were still lacking in comparison to Her Majesty Empress Wu. Peony, the person in question, didn't seem to care too much. Or perhaps it could be said that she didn't have the corresponding sense of crisis. She received a call at this time, and the smile on her face grew even more radiant. Her curved eyes seemed to flow with colorful light. Be it the Trigate security personnel beside her or the Blood Flame Order personnel, they all couldn't help but steal glances at her. It was hard to avoid their emotions from rising and falling. The living starry sky had a reaction. Darling, have you arrived yet? How's my setup? One fatal strike. Peony completely disregarded this. Her mind had already withdrawn from the mission. She allowed her mood to melt into her smile and flow naturally. As long as you're happy, it's fine. No problem. Tonight, everyone's going to turn the heavens high and celebrate your success. He should be her boyfriend, but what's with that doting expression? After the writing class, it was time for the society's activities. Luo Nan was liberated. He was still thinking about the confrontation, entanglement, and communication at the recycling stratum of Shuanghe district. Many pieces of information would not have appeared at the time, or perhaps Luo Nan would not have been able to see them even if they had appeared. However, He was certain that both the Bloodflame Order and Trigate Security would hold a meeting to discuss the situation after he returned. It shouldn't be a problem for him to piece together a rough picture of the truth. Seiji had all the benefits, yet he remained uninvolved. It was a bit like a villain, but it did make Seiji feel great. At a time like this, it was none of his business whether others were in a good mood or not. Luonan waited for his car at the parking spot. His mind was pondering over the problem of system perception. It was just as he had understood before. He discovered an excellent early warning method. Though it was still lacking in many ways, it didn't seem difficult to make up for it. All he needed to do was expand the number of believers a bit and scatter them across the various city districts. They would connect seamlessly with each other, forming a closed system. Targets that were not part of the system, especially ability users who possessed self-logic, would be more or less accurate. What security and bodyguards did he need back then? Even the Skynet system that covered the entire city wouldn't be as sharp as he was. Even if the Order of Justice's First Ablatum, Deputy Secretary General Gong Chi, and other powerful people came to kill them, Luonan would be able to know their positions and coordinates the moment they stepped into the boundaries of Xia City. They would be hundreds of kilometers away, and Luonan would be able to notify President Ouyang and Her Majesty Empress Wu to take to the skies to intercept them. TSK. Just thinking about it was exciting. As for expanding the number of believers, Luonan scratched his head. The streetcar just so happened to arrive. He boarded the car and continued to scratch. He felt a bit subtle. Luonan was certain that he had never truly regarded himself as a god. He had only seen bamboo poles paper. He had borrowed the relationship between believers and gods to describe the various mysteries of formatting theory. That was all there was to it. Therefore, Luonan wasn't like the contemporary secret orders. He didn't deliberately ponder over the so-called doctrines and rituals. Then, he used all sorts of methods to actively expand the scale of his believers. So far, he had accepted believers like Ink and the Wraith Sign. He didn't care about Ruewan, who was a special example that appeared and disappeared from time to time. His true human believers numbered no more than 3 people. Bays, Xie Junping, and Cat Eyes. Black Tiger Bays was someone who relied on force to survive. His personality and conduct had been polished by the Order of Justice for a long time. He could be said to be plugged in and out. There was no adjustment period. Xie Junping wasn't a person of the same circle. He was muddle-headed and completely unaware. Luonan deliberately played down this relationship and forgot about it. He just left it there and let Xie Junping do what he wanted. As for Cat Eyes, she was probably the only example of a believer that possessed self-awareness, and the entire process couldn't be said to be smooth. Cat Eyes certainly had to bear the responsibility for this matter. But even if she had courted death herself, the series of developments that followed, especially the mental and willpower torment, made Luonan, the beneficiary, feel quite upset in his heart. This was especially true after the format pyramid transformed into a star atlas. The materialized chains disappeared, and a more essential connection became prominent. Luonan inspected his believers one by one and discovered that Cat Eyes was acting extremely dispirited. Her mental state was worrying. This was absolutely not a situation Luonan wished to see. Luonan sat in the last row of the trolley, his fingers rubbing against his hair. As he pondered, his thoughts unconsciously shifted through the living starry sky. He saw Cat Eyes once more. It was the middle of the afternoon. Normal people worked and studied. Ability users cultivated and completed missions. But what about Cat Eyes? She was sitting cross-legged on the floor of the room. Her hair was messy, and she wore a sleeveless top and brief. Large swaths of healthy, smooth, light brown skin were exposed. She looked like she had just woken up from a hangover. Her fingers were unconsciously playing with a wine bottle. There were at least a dozen wine bottles around her body. Most of them were empty and overturned. They were a complete mess. Holy crap. If this continued, she would really be crippled. Luonan felt that this was no good. He was impulsive for a moment, so he simply said, "How about we have a chat?" Cat Eye's figure froze the moment the thought came out. Her boring and monotonous actions came to an end. The wine bottle beside her feet rolled far away. Luonan only remembered when he saw the statue-like figure. He had not used the Hexaear's channel at all. Instead, he had used his thoughts to directly enter. It was needless to say that this sort of method was one of the greatest taboos between ability users, especially mental ability users. From Cat Eye's perspective, this was undoubtedly another stab in her bloody wound. Luonan was embarrassed. He didn't even think about whether or not he should apologize. But then he saw Cat Eye's reveal a strange smile for some reason. She supported her forehead with her hand, pressing against her hairline. She gathered her fluffy hair a bit, and her appearance was a bit similar to Luonan's. It was just that she exuded a serious feeling of decadence and a bit of self-mockery. "Okay, but I still have to go teach dancing in a bit. Boss, do you want me to skip work?" No need. The class ends at 8 in the evening. No problem. Only after Luonan spoke did he remember that he still had a social engagement tonight. He could completely have Cat Eyes come back tomorrow. But the words had already been spoken. Changing them now would be too passive. He might as well just stick together. Then come to Frost River Reality at Cloud City Water Village. I'll be waiting here. I'll be there at 8:30. The conversation ended here. The conversation between the two did not use any electronic devices. It was purely a telepathic exchange. It was smooth and natural, as if they had done this countless times. Cat Eyes looked as if she had just finished a routine phone call. Her face was apathetic. She picked up a full wine bottle beside her and skillfully opened the cap with her fingers. She blew too hard, and the yellowish liquid of the wine overflowed from the corner of her lips. It flowed along her chin, neck, collarbone, all the way to her bulging chest. It seeped into a deep cleavage that could make any man stare blankly. Her camisole was drenched. The contours of her body and the corresponding details were all revealed down to the finest hair. That scene. Luonan's face turned red. He hurriedly cut off his telepathic thoughts. He unconsciously increased the strength of his fingers that brushed past his hair, scratching his scalp until it hurt. Only now did he truly come back to his senses. He really called that sister over. What was he going to talk about? Was he going to talk about taking her in as a believer? "I'm very sorry, but I haven't figured out the unfollow function yet. Why don't you wait a bit? Or should I say, girl, since you're already like this, you should obediently listen to me in the future. Warm my bed, make my quilts, dance for my amusement, and serve me well. I'll guarantee you glory, splendor, wealth, and endless benefits in the future?" Damn, he was too impulsive. Luonan held his head, dispelling these senseless and foolish thoughts. He faced the roof of the trolley and silently grinned. He didn't know how to evaluate himself. The Hexaear vibrated while he was in a dilemma. Someone from the society was calling. Could it be that Cat Eyes wanted to go back on her word and not come tonight? Luonan, this coward, was already looking forward to it. However, the caller was not Cat Eyes. It was Papercut. "Nanster, I'm here. You're ringing and banging here. You haven't finished fiddling with it yet? Huh? Brother Papercut, where are you? I'll be right there." Only now did Luonan remember that he had already made an appointment yesterday. What was it? Luonan only remembered that it was a combat machine used by the control class. It was because he had asked Papercut for his so-called big move. He had been misunderstood as needing defensive measures, and Papercut had taken the initiative to deliver it to him. Frankly speaking, Luonan wasn't too interested in combat machines in the past. Now that he had the dripping sword, there was no need to even mention it. However, Papercut had come over. Luo Nan took the opportunity to express his gratitude and exchange their experiences with the dripping sword and the activation class. Luo Nan and Papercut chatted for a bit before another call came in. This time it was Shuelei. Nanster, you're done with class. I'll be at gears soon. I'm going to stretch my muscles a bit first. Oh my, thank you, brother Papercut. Luo Nan heard that Shuelei wanted to rely on Sans Ho training, so he secretly cried out for Papercut's blessing. He hurriedly cut off Shuelei's words. Brother Papercut just arrived. He brought a combat machine. I heard it's quite interesting. Let's go take a look together and test out its power. Shuelei was a bit stunned by Luo Nan's words. Brother Papercut is teaching you a new lesson? He had taken Luo Nan's words seriously. Luo Nan gave a chuckle and vaguely brushed it off. To put it bluntly, he was really not interested in close combat. On one hand, he felt that he probably wasn't cut out for it. On the other hand, he was far too busy with his homework right now. From the inside to the outside, from the fleshly body to the soul, from the self to the believers, from gear to the clouds. He wished he could split a minute in half. He really didn't have the energy to open another lesson. He could only let Shuelei down for the time being. Luo Nan arrived before Shuelei. When he arrived at gear, he saw Papercut strolling around the front hall with his hands behind his back, watching how the construction workers operated. He looked like a supervisor at first glance, but that chubby face of his didn't seem dignified at all. Brother Papercut. Luo Nan greeted him and went forward. Let's go to the bar counter in the passageway at the bottom of the lake. The work on the surface isn't done yet, so it's a bit messy. It should be a lot quieter underground. It's fine. Let's go back and try it out. It's better to be a bit more spacious. Papercut waved his hand. He deliberately revealed his left wrist to attract Luo Nan's gaze. Luo Nan saw a black wristguard wrapped around Papercut's white and plump wrist. It was quite eye-catching. Papercut even intentionally stretched it a few times. It seemed that the material was more flexible and tough, but Luo Nan couldn't see anything else. This is? The flywheel arm. Oh, this is? Luo Nan finally remembered. The combat machine that Papercut said he was going to bring yesterday was called this. It sounded like a metal prosthetic at first glance, but Luo Nan never expected it to be like a wrist guard. It could be bent and bent as it pleased. Flexible metal material? The metal composition isn't high. After all, the vast majority of metal materials aren't suitable for soul strength interference and control. The ratio needs to be very particular. Papercut took off the flywheel arm and handed it to Luo Nan. Try it and you'll know. This thing is quite light and portable. Oh, I've sent over the instruction manual. There's even an instruction manual. Of course, there's an after-sales service as well. Papercut chuckled as he helped Luo Nan put it on. He taught Luo Nan the basics of how to use it. Luo Nan put this thing on and felt that it was different from a normal sports wrist guard. Aside from the material, it was a bit thicker. The feeling of fixing the wrist was quite obvious. Luckily, it used memory material. Luo Nan just needed to bend his wrist a few times to be able to wear it comfortably. Whether it was comfortable or not was not a key indicator for a combat machine. Even Papercut said, "It's light and portable. It's easy to use. You don't even need to be taught. You can learn it with a glance. As for speed, lethality, and so on, they're all average. It's quite interesting to treat it as a toy. I just want you to experience the technique of the control class and see if you're interested in delving deeper into it. Do you understand the instruction manual?" Luo Nan didn't say anything. He turned his wrist and looked at the structure of the flywheel arm when it was bent. He combined it with the instruction manual and observed it carefully. Only then did he discover that when this thing was woven, it was divided into several layers. Each layer was independent, like a deformed fish scale armor. The layers were stacked on top of each other, but they weren't fragmented. There were only a dozen or so pieces. Chapter 391. Luonan nodded after looking inside and outside. He followed the instruction manual and pointed toward the jungle in front of Gear. Papercut hurried to stop him, indicating to Luonan to pay attention to the construction workers inside and outside Gear. Let's keep a low profile. Let's walk a bit deeper. Luonan hooked his lips into a cold smile. It's fine. They're experienced and knowledgeable. Papercut knew what Luonan meant, but he couldn't say anything. He laughed and pulled Luonan deeper into the jungle. They didn't walk 2 steps when Shuelei turned from the jungle path. He saw the two pulling each other and was a bit stupefied. Where are you guys going? Yo, Leicester, you're here. Papercut was quite familiar with Shuelei. He chuckled and greeted him. Brother Papercut, Shuelei responded. He finally found a reason. You guys came to class. Luonan sweated a bit when he heard this. Luckily, Papercut's answer was very vague. We came to inspect the goods. We can go take a look together. What goods? Shuelei wasn't completely connected. Luonan's eyes were sharp. He could tell with a glance that this fellow had yet to give up his evil intentions. He wanted to drag Luonan to practice sans ho with him. Luonan even brought a set of Taoist clothes. How could he let Shuelei have his way? He immediately made up his mind. He would rely on Brother Papercut's protection today. He would cling tightly to this thick thigh and make Shuelei embarrassed to force him. His thoughts spun, and he used the reason of trying out the control class to drag Shuelei into the jungle. He turned his head and said, Brother Papercut, everyone's here today. Let's go get together tonight if we have nothing to do. Papercut went, ha. He was a bit surprised. He knew Luonan's temperament. Luonan could be considered pure and kind, but how could he understand the ways of the world? He had given Luonan lessons for over a dozen days, but he had never received this kind of treatment. Generally, fatties were more self-aware. Papercut asked, Why did you suddenly think of this? You didn't invite me specifically, right? Who else? Luonan knew that the invitation came too abruptly. He didn't dare give Papercut too much time to think. He chuckled and gave himself more reasons and bargaining chip. Go. We're just playing together. I invited Leicester. Yeah, and Cat Eyes. Huh. Papercut constantly changed his tone and words today. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to express his muddled thought. He couldn't help but ask, Who are you talking about? Cat Eyes? Cat Eyes. Shuelei was also stunned. Could it be that the gathering Luonan was talking about was different from the one he mentioned at noon? Luonan opened his mouth. He suddenly wanted to slap himself. Today, he was a typical case of only caring about his head and not caring about the bottom. He only wanted to slack off, but he ended up piling up more troublesome things. Hey, don't rush to a conclusion. Luonan suddenly had a flash of inspiration. He blinked his eyes, and a line of words came out of his mouth. Moreover, he didn't need to fake it. He hemmed and hawed as he said, Didn't you say that she changed professions? Papercut thought that he understood when he saw Luonan's slightly embarrassed expression. He nodded at Luonan and laughed involuntarily. Don't think that Cat Eyes gave up on all-encompassing sensing because of you? Who told you that? This. Luonan averted his gaze. It's me. Shuelei raised half of his arm and obediently admitted it. The source of his information was the gossip circulating on the psychic wave network. It had a deductive nature to it, so it was hard not to feel a bit awkward right now. Papercut looked at these two 16 or 17-year-old kids. He felt that the matter of education was a long way off. He felt a great sense of responsibility for a moment, and he earnestly and patiently explained, It's not called changing professions. It's just focusing on choosing a more suitable path of development. In the past, people looked forward to Cat Eyes long-range sensing the most, okay? You don't need to feel embarrassed about this, but don't spread it. After all, this rumor is meant to trample on people. If things go wrong, both sides will be ruined. Luonan and Shuelei obediently lowered their heads and received the lecture. Papercut thought about the meeting at night and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Cat Eyes actually agreed? She doesn't feel embarrassed. Indeed, she wasn't embarrassed. She was dispirited. Luonan felt more and more that inviting Papercut to oversee things was a good choice. At the very least, there would be a buffer. They could get through the most awkward period of the early stages. As for how to communicate in depth and eliminate misunderstandings, Luonan could only act according to the circumstances. Since Cat Eyes had said this much, Papercut found it hard to refuse. He was worried that these two youngsters weren't good at the art of communication. They might do bad things out of good intentions, and they might really shed all pretenses of cordiality with Cat Eyes. Cat Eyes was quite famous in the society for her eccentric temperament. Since he had decided to participate, Papercut didn't waste his breath. He saved his strength for tonight. He sighed and brought back the main topic. Come. Let's first operate the flywheel arm. Though Luonan didn't have much interest in this type of combat machine, he still chose this one when he had to choose between sparring with it and Sans Ho. He immediately roused his spirits and prepared to mobilize his interference power according to the instructions on the manual. Papercut wanted to teach him how to aim first. The safety factor of this toy is quite high. You won't easily injure yourself, and there are no problems with various postures. But you need to know that this isn't an energy wave. It's too stupid to point your palm forward. It includes finger jabbing and arm stretching. All of these are useless moves. Luonan was a bit at a loss from Papercut's words. Then what kind of posture should I use? There's a lot. The most effective method is to throw it. It's like throwing a dart, striking out with a fist, chopping with a knife hand, and so on. Anything works. Luonan waved his arm stiffly, like this. Shuele curled his lips to the side. Zero foundation. Clearly, Shuele already had some judgment regarding the matter of Luonan repeatedly avoiding Sans Ho training. Right now, he was jabbing at Luonan. Luonan pretended not to hear her. He first tried it twice. Then he began to mobilize his interference power, pouring it into the wrist guard to activate it. As the divine chakra and body chakra intersected and rotated, the heart lamp of the eye's orifice lit up and illuminated his brain. In the past, this would be the sign of the formation of interference force. But Luonan's foundation was far too thick, even if he didn't put much effort into cultivating the internal refinement technique in the past 2 days. He also had the assistance of the Wraith Sign's meteorite descent. Under the urging of many factors, not only was the eye's orifice a small success, but the orifice of the mouth and tongue had also taken shape. It transformed into a spiritual pool of liquid jade, resonating with the heart lantern of the eye's orifice from a distance. In terms of internal training, the mind lamp spirit pool was like the spring sun melting into snow, the cold and warmth stimulating each other. And in terms of the interference of the mental and material planes, after the mind lamp was lit, the spirit pool filled with jade liquid would turn into the highest quality, lamp oil, connecting with the mind lamp and helping it burn layer by layer. In this way, it was equivalent to combining 3 apertures into one. The strength of his interference power had increased by more than 3 times. Luonan originally wanted to follow the instructions in the manual and increase the control, but now he directly raised it to the max. His arm trembled slightly, and then a long hissing sound rang out. A circular sheet ejected from the middle of the wrist guard. It first spun in midair before suddenly accelerating. It advanced in a straight line through the air with a thud, cutting into the trunk of the large tree in front of him. The entire sheet sank in. Luonan noticed that the entire process didn't seem like he was shooting a dart. It was more like he was shooting a missile. The flywheel arm acted as a launching tube. All it did was fling the sheet out. The driving force was what drove the sheet to kill the target. Otherwise, with the sharpness, speed, and trajectory of the sheet, Luonan's palm would have been the first to be pierced. The safety settings were very successful, but the power was only average. At the very least, it was a level lower than normal firearms. Of course, it was fatal to normal people, but Luonan needed to consider it carefully against ability users. As Luonan was thinking, Papercut laughed from the side. This is an emergency shrapnel. It's used to scare people when you meet the enemy in a hurry. You used up all your strength just now, right? Luonan still needed to adapt to the changes in interference power after combining 3 orifices into one. He just laughed and tacitly agreed. Papercut continued to teach Luonan the trick. Did you notice that the emergency shrapnel just now was shot from the middle layer of many layers of armor? Every single one of them is like this. There is no way that the upper layer will be the first to fire. This is all for the sake of drawing support from the reaction force between them. The friction is sufficient to ignite fire. Feel it. Don't you think this makes sense? Luonan still didn't open his mouth. His mind sunk into the inner layer of the flywheel arm. He used his interference power once more to feel an irregular sheet in the middle. It trembled and hummed within the interlayer. It rotated at low speeds under the pressure of the same type of armor. It shifted slightly, constantly accumulating power. Excellent. You're drawing a bow without firing it. Layer upon layer of reinforcement. Nanster, you really do have talent in the control class. Papercut sighed unconsciously as he sighed in admiration. Did he have to watch the rising star of the activation class change professions? Luonan followed Papercut's explanation and controlled the increasingly active sheet within the wrist guard. The temperature of the inner layer of the wrist guard was rising, but there was no obvious change in the outer layer's temperature. The shielding effect was top-notch. Shuele, who was next to Luonan, had keen senses. He sensed a few subtleties and came over with some curiosity. He even reached out to touch it, but Papercut slapped his hand away. What if I can't control it and it explodes? Luonan rolled his eyes. I think I can still hold on. Then continue. This toy will certainly become more powerful the longer it accumulates power. This was actually true. Luonan could feel that the sheet relied on its overall structure to accumulate power physically. It also relied on special materials to endlessly absorb interference power. Clearly, there was something unique about the single structure. The technical content of the flywheel arm was much higher than it appeared on the surface. Papercut spoke faster, introducing the firing mode to Luonan. If you want to attack, the flywheel arm itself has a built-in chip. It can be connected to intelligent equipment to preset a flight path, select a special shaped sheet, and calculate obstacles, air resistance, and so on. It's very good for sniping in complex environments. Plus, we all have the hexair. It saves quite a bit of effort. Luonan followed Papercut's instructions and made a wireless connection. Sure enough, an exquisite interface popped up on his retina. It displayed the real-time changing data according to the scene before him. Through the hexair, all operations could be realized with telepathic control. Luonan randomly chose a target, and the interface used dotted lines to indicate the available route. At the same time, it indicated the percentage of power needed for the best effect. Was this like playing a video game? Luonan didn't have a good or bad impression of this sort of idiotic operation. He was a rookie. The more complete the auxiliary functions, the more advantageous it would be for him. However, a true expert probably wouldn't like this sort of program setup. Papercut added before Luonan could finish his thoughts. Also, if you feel that you're awesome, you can choose mental control. This is a test of a person's continuous operation. Awesome people can even have 12 sharp blades fly around their body in unison. It's like controlling 12 flying swords. They can fight in close combat or attack from a distance. They can scare people to death even if they can't kill them. This is the proper way to use it. Luonan slightly swayed his arm. Since the flywheel arm was used by the control class, he should place more emphasis on microcontrol. Papercut spread his hands. You can say that, but the actual situation is different. You see, in order to guarantee the structural function, every combination of thin slices has a different shape. Their flight trajectories are different as well. There are also all sorts of splicing combinations. A normal person wouldn't be able to hold on if they didn't use smart equipment to calculate. Maybe architects and extraordinaries can do it, but who would count on them when it comes to that? That's true. Luonan raised his hand and fired according to smart mode. The irregular slices were dim but sharp. They instantly broke through the forest barrier of foliage, slicing off the thick branches that served as target. They charged into the air before turning back. They buzzed as they spun in the air like a miniature chainsaw. Branches and leaves were shattered everywhere they went. The momentum was quite astonishing. Luonan fired a boomerang. The irregular slices circled back, their speed decreasing layer by layer. They fell to Luonan's wrist like a tired bird returning to its nest. Luonan continued to pour in his interference power, and the slices pieced back together. Papercut clapped his hands. Okay, you're getting started. It's just that your operation is too rigid. Actually, no matter if it's smart mode or free mode, you can switch between them. You can change directions at will and increase your power. If you're in combat, I suggest you first use smart control. You can design a good route and you can add mental control at the last moment. It saves you a lot of effort. It's sudden and flexible enough. The effect of catching your opponent off guard is still there. That's true. Luonan continued to practice in the forest. He didn't forget to let Shui have a taste in the middle of it. He pacified Shui's emotions and divided his mind, so that Shui wouldn't jump back to the topic of Sansho training. Time passed quickly, and the sky was already dark. The three of them had enough fun in the nearby forest, so they prepared to return. Luonan's wristband vibrated at this time. It was a call from Tianxi. Her tone was a bit nervous. Junior Nan, I'm really sorry. There are some things I need to take care of in the society. Tianxi is doing experiment. We might have to go a bit later. Got it, senior sister Tian. Luonan didn't want to give Tianxi any more pressure. He was counting on this senior sister to suppress Mo Peng and the others. Papercut was baffled to the side. Who is it? You're also getting together in a bit? Luonan casually said, one of my senior sisters and her little brother. They're coming with us tonight. Outside the circle? Papercut was very surprised. Luonan had a guilty conscience from Papercut's reaction. He could only evade the important and dwell on the trivial. It's Tianxi. She's the one who became a hostage at Ocean Sky Cloud City. You've met her before, right? He looked at Papercut's expression and knew that he couldn't hide it any longer. He could only add, there are also two relatives of mine. Maybe there are also their friends. It's a gathering and it's at Frost River Reality. I'll just meet them face to face. I'll tell them about us later. Oh you. Papercut really didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He reached out to point at Luonan again, but he was discouraged before he could open his mouth. You still have to learn in the future. It looks like there are quite a few people this time. Have you booked a room yet? A room? Luonan entered a stupefied state. Chapter 392. You're inviting a lot of people. You have to go in and out together. Of course, you need a room. And if you feel that the two circles aren't suited to be together, you can book 2 rooms. You just need to run around in the middle. Papercut taught Luonan step by step. Before he became the elementary instructor, he never thought that he would be responsible for imparting such basic social knowledge. Luonan could not help but feel embarrassed. Speaking of which, he really did not care too much about tonight's trip to Frost River Reality. He just thought that he would go to the game hall and bring people in. How could he have known that there would be such details when it came to entertaining people? It made sense when he thought about it. Last time Mo Chio and Tianxi had a get-together, they had booked a private room. I'll book one right away. Luonan was flustered for a moment. He hastily contacted Frost River Reality. He was lucky. Originally, he would not have had the slightest chance with the explosive business there. However, someone just happened to cancel their subscription. He was also a person who had personally experienced the events of Frost River reality. He actually had a bit of compensatory privileges, allowing him to snatch a medium-sized room. However, it was impossible to realize his idea of booking 2 rooms. So be it. Fat people don't look old. With my looks, it should be enough for me to pretend to be young. Papercut consoled himself with a few words before sighing. Let's go. We're going to wait now. I'll teach you another trick. Since you're the one treating, arriving earlier than the guests is the most basic courtesy. The brand new flagship store of Frost River Reality maintained its high-end image. The venue was set up in Aurora Cloud City. This was the 6th stage of the 6 circular staircase buildings of Cloud City Water Village. It was also the tallest building aside from the main building. Monday was not the busiest time of the day. Luonan and his group did not arrive too late. At the very least, they arrived before the evening rush hour created by the office workers. However, Frost River Reality, which had just opened for business, still attracted a large number of players. The tide of students from the surrounding large living areas became the main consumers of this time. The theme of this week's event at Frost River Reality's flagship store was the Wasteland. With the support of reality technology that could pass for reality, the surging stream of people walked from the resplendent modern metropolis into the declining small town. Unexpectedly, there was no sense of incongruity. Frost River Reality, which was decorated with reality technology, was like a starving beast. It swallowed the stream of people in large mouthfuls, seemingly never spitting them out. This business is really explosive. Crag clicked his tongue in wonder. Luonan and the others had yet to enter. They sat at the Frozen Star ice cream shop that was standard in every Frost River reality. They ordered 3 drinks and waited for Emoping, Emohan, and the others to come over. The frozen planet also coordinated with the wasteland theme of Frost River reality by covering the entirety of reality. All of the dining cups were replaced with worn-out wooden and iron product. The tables, chairs, and counters were also changed accordingly. Sitting here, if one didn't care about their clothing, would be like entering a vagrant tavern in the wilderness. Oh, if one ordered an iced drink that cost more than 100 renminbi, they would get a vagrant cloak for free. There's only one word: burn. Burn money. Papercut took a sip of his drink and evaluated. The event planner should have been to the wilderness before. The background is pretty good, but it's limited to this ice cream shop. What the hell is that small town? Anyone who dares to build something like that in the wilderness is doomed to be flattened by mutants. As they chatted, Papercut, who was such an honest person, couldn't help but show off a few words, but that was all. They soon gathered together and chatted enthusiastically about the flywheel arm. Papercut was still teaching Luonan a few things to take note of. This toy's components are exquisite and complex. It's definitely not the durable type. Think about that emergency shrapnel. It must have taken quite a bit of effort to dig it out from the tree trunk, right? After a mid to high intensity battle, the recovery ratio of components isn't high. As a conventional weapon, the logistical pressure isn't small. Luonan wasn't prepared to use the flywheel arm as a conventional weapon. He just wanted to use it to practice his control of interference power after combining 3 orifices into one. It was quite suitable to add a way to adapt. But even so, logistics was a more realistic problem. Right? Luonan vaguely remembered Papercut saying that there was an after-sales service. Papercut laughed heartily when Luonan asked about this. I was waiting for you to ask this question. Of course there's an after-sales service. You know him, old Zhai. Luonan was shocked. This is worker Zhai's work? Papercut shook his head. He's not the main creator, but he's one of the auxiliary designers. In the beginning, he was also responsible for the OEM manufacturing of some of the components. He looked all around and lowered his voice. Actually, the flywheel arm was a cooperative project between the society and the government. Its main purpose was to research the ratio and structural design of easily interfering substances. Unfortunately, it was abandoned halfway. Most of the research was lost. The flywheel arm was the only concrete result, but it was lacking in stamina. It was impossible to conduct follow-up research. You guys know that old Jai has always been very passionate about these things. Plus, this was the first time he was deeply involved in the research of the society. He couldn't bear to part with it. He took advantage of the fact that the project was off the drawing board to buy the property rights to this toy and change it to handmade. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to make it. Right now, he's only maintaining the after-sales service. He still has to spend quite a bit of money on it. Luo Nan shook his head. It's too hard for worker Jai to do it by himself. Papercut shrugged. So I'm doing some sort of sales promotion for him. The product is free, but the after-sales service isn't good. That's for sure, Luo Nan answered without hesitation. Papercut sighed ruefully. Old Jai is certainly at the expert level when it comes to mechanical design, but his ability talent is mediocre. He doesn't have the support of hard strength. It's hard to be optimistic about him forging a successful ability user weapon. His mood has dropped over the past 2 years. But I don't know what happened when you went last time, but you stimulated him a bit. He's been very excited these past few days. Being excited was good. Luo Nan didn't forget that the dynamo core he took from Gym Master Xiao was still in worker Jai's hands. It was undergoing in-depth research. It would be best if there was progress. Shuelei had some understanding of worker Jai, but it wasn't as deep as Luo Nan's. Shuelei had an impression of worker Jai, so he asked Luo Nan in a low voice, "Is worker Jai lacking in soul strength?" Luo Nan laughed when he heard this. This was typical layman's words. "I'm evaluating your strength. I'll say how many kilograms of your fist force is. So, how much strength do you have? Do you recognize that?" Shuelei immediately understood. "I understand. Soul strength must be measured from all aspects. The society had the 4 dimensions measurement. It included the 4 basic measurement standards of depth, intensity, sensitivity, and affinity. However, it was far from accurate quantification. Therefore, it was hard for Luo Nan to say what the key factor restricting worker Jai's growth in strength was. After all, soul strength was far too subtle and complex. Papercut swallowed the drink in his cup along with the ice cube. Talent. 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 Important words can be repeated 300 times. In our domain, if you start off as a blank slate, you won't be able to reach that standard. You won't be able to reach it in your entire life. Old Jai has some skill, but he's just a bit off. He can't go up no matter what. And as long as he can't go up, many methods of training and growth are meaningless. Luo Nan and Shuelei glanced at each other. Actually, they were a bit disapproving of Papercut's words. Shuelei felt that his own ability was partly due to the guidance of a famous teacher, and partly due to his own solid training. Talent wasn't a decisive factor. Luo Nan thought of his grandfather's formatting theory. If he had talent, he would have followed his grandfather's theory. He would have used medicine to pile up and mold it step by step. Papercut could guess what the 2 youths were thinking, but he didn't care. Of the 600,000 ability users in the world, almost 90% lacked the corresponding aptitude and could not be truly awakened. They could only waste their time in a state that was neither good nor bad. It was one of the most painful experiences in the world to give light, but to wipe out hope. Without long-term, extensive contact, the 2 little ones would not be able to truly understand that group. All of this required experience. When their eyes met, the enthusiastic young man and the passive uncle understood each other tacitly. Their magnetic fields sizzled. Now that they had the time to chat, Shuelei couldn't help but ask, "How is it possible that there are no ways to train and gain strength?" The dojo master had once said that the 3 treasures of essence, breath, and spirit were shared by everyone. When your spirit is full, your chi will be full, and when your chi is full, your spirit will be full. This is a chain that runs through everything. If you don't have enough soul strength, strengthening your body is also a way. Papercut laughed. How is a fleshly body enhancement different from a mental enhancement? The former had a foothold in the material world. As long as one cultivated it properly, they could build up layer by layer and temper themselves inside and out. Even a shabby brothel could one day transform into a royal palace. But the mental plane is illusory, and the activation of abilities usually comes out of nowhere. It doesn't have muscles, and it can't be increased with large amounts of exercise. The main reason lies in the fact that its nature is far too different from the material world. It's impossible to find a point of connection. Even if you find it, there will be a difference between reality and illusion. It's like a chicken talking to a duck. Luo Nan had a pensive look on his face. So you're saying that interference power is very important. Papercut tapped his empty cup. Yes, interference power is extremely important. President Ouyang once said that the current theory of supernatural powers is incomplete. Only by realizing the function of interference can soul strength be incorporated into the experience system that people can understand. Only then can the two most crucial tasks of observation and cognition be realized. Only then can one borrow the foundation of the material world to realize effective growth. The stronger the interference power, the faster the growth. Papercut immediately retreated in defeat when he saw Luo Nan's pure eyes. I know that you're an exception. You're the only one whose interference power is trash in the early stages, but your soul strength can still soar. Formatting theory is truly extraordinary. Luo Nan loved to hear these kinds of words. He immediately smiled until his eyes squinted. However, he didn't believe that this point could reflect the particularity of formatting theory. No. My self-format is also constructed on top of the material world. It is constructed on the special structure of the nervous system. It's not that it doesn't have interference power. It's just that it is very likely to form a one-way channel. I can only use matter to interfere with the mind. The reverse won't work. This will drive the rapid growth of soul strength, but it will also cause a serious imbalance between body and soul. Papercut blinked. He found it strange that Luo Nan actually understood what Luo Nan was saying. What you say is quite reasonable, if I can study and analyze it in earnest. Luo Nan rolled his eyes. Don't dissect it. I don't want to be a guinea pig. Having said this, he thought of octopus. He had already made some progress with the help of his grandfather's notes and formulas. He didn't know whether or not he could produce some dazzling result. Perhaps formatting theory really did have flaws, but Luo Nan's own practice proved that these flaws could be overcome. He had already borrowed Jim Master Xiu's guidance and coupling theory to turn a one-way channel into a two-way channel. This sort of experience could be completely integrated into formatting theory, making it more persuasive. It could become a hot topic in the inner world and even the entire world. Right now, the momentum was good. Luo Nan laughed unconsciously. Hey, what are you thinking about? Shuelei saw Luo Nan laugh foolishly for some inexplicable reason after calling Luo Nan a guinea pig. Shuelei was a bit worried that something would go wrong with Luo Nan's mental circuit. Only now did Luo Nan realize that he had lost control of himself. He hurriedly waved his hand. It's nothing. I just feel that President Ouyang's description is precise. Last time at Frost River Reality. I'm talking about the one at the center of the city. Fairchild said something similar, like observation is order and the like, but he didn't mention the experience system. President Ouyang's premise is very good. From Luo Nan's understanding, the so-called experience system should be a set of observations and cognitive results that could be deduced and generated through practice and verification. Ability users, who found it hard to become awakened, lived their entire lives in the material world. Though they possessed a bit of talent for supernatural powers, It was insufficient to correspond with their daily life experiences. Instead, it was easy for them to get lost in the illusory mental plane. They were unable to distinguish between what was extraordinary and what was fabricated. Only by realizing interference and entering the realm of normal human experience could one's soul strength become a real existence. Only then would one be able to abandon the obstacles of one's chaotic consciousness and transform the potential one possessed bit by bit into supernatural powers. Therefore, how important was it to have a stable and long-lasting interference mode? A flash of inspiration flashed through Luonan's mind, and an idea suddenly popped out. After a bit of deduction, he felt that it was a bit complicated, so he simply did it. With a thought, a precise structure was engraved at the interface between the mental plane and the material plane. The condensation ring. The ice cream shop was full of water vapor. In the blink of an eye, beads of water condensed out of thin air and floated above the table between the three people. Whether it was Schwelle or Papercut, they were both very keen characters. They immediately sensed it, and their gazes locked onto it. Papercut was particularly shocked. The dripping sword? My goodness, you're this familiar with it? Luonan waved his hand. Let's not talk about the dripping sword for now. Let's just talk about the condensation ring. Actually, I feel that this might be more suitable for Worker Zhai. Making this thing doesn't require too much interference power, and Worker Zhai also has an amplification device. Even if he loses some precision, Worker Zhai should be able to make up for it with his level. Once he succeeds, he will have a fulcrum that will be constantly. Luonan spoke in a single breath according to his own train of thought. Then he saw Papercut's blank expression that said, "Here you go again." Clearly, Luonan's previous words were wasted. Luonan also felt that he didn't speak clearly, so he prepared to add, "What I mean is... Nanster, where are you? We're here." Mo Peng's communication cut in perfectly. Before Luonan's voice could fall, he saw Mo Peng take the lead at the entrance of the ice cream shop, leading a majestic group inside. Luonan instinctively counted 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9. 9 people. The ice cream shop was densely packed with people, and it had undergone materialization. It was built to look like a dark and gloomy tavern. With so many people entering in one breath, the space suddenly became oppressive.